The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Hello, good evening. I hope you're all doing well out there, and I hope you can hear me. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, back with another live reading, continuing with our book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, published in 2012 by Ioan, Ratiu. This is part 9. We are about halfway through the book, and tonight we're going to be reading chapter 6, The UN Scam. Yes, you heard that right. The United Nations, that most hallowed of international institutions, is a scam. Sorry to break it to you, but that is what we're going to be learning about tonight. So, welcome. If you are tuning in live, I am very grateful to have you here, and it is an absolute blessing to be able to broadcast to you this evening. And if you're tuning in on the replay, it is equally a blessing, and I'm equally grateful, but you have the added advantage of being able to go down to the pinned comment underneath the video where there are some timestamps, and you can use those timestamps to navigate tonight's episode. So how are you all doing? I hope you're doing well. As usual, my nose started itching right as we went on to live stream there. I hope you're doing well. It is the winter solstice. It is the shortest day of the year. From tomorrow onwards, things only get better. The days get longer. We get more sunlight, which means more vitamin D, which means more health and happiness for everybody who is wise enough to get out there and get some of that sunlight onto their skin. The more sunlight you can get on your skin, the healthier and happier you will be. That's true. That's science. That's true fact. That's not just me making things up because I have a hidden agenda to get everybody off the screens and outdoors. it will actually make you happier and healthier to be outside more. And that's something that we are definitely, we struggle with here in the UK. Especially, we don't get enough vitamin D as it is. There's a lot of cloud. Some of them real, some of them, made by whoever it is that makes clouds. We're not quite privy to that information. Although there was a clip that I showed in an episode once of Jeremy Clarkson demonstrating the cloud seeding machine. That was over in America. You can look that up very easily. It's on YouTube, Jeremy Clarkson cloud seeding machine. It'll show you him saying, wow, this is amazing. This machine here will create a cloud. And then there's a clip of him standing, getting drenched in rain that has just fallen out of the cloud that the giant cloud seeding machine has created. So cloud seeding machines are endorsed and fully approved and admitted by that crazy conspiracy theorist, Jeremy Clarkson. These days, he's into farming, and he's trying to stick up for the way that the farmers are under attack through all different avenues, making their lives very hard, making their jobs very hard, making their ability to sustain themselves and pass on something valuable to future generations very difficult. So he's still carrying on with his crazy crackpot conspiracy theorizing. But yes, in England, it's difficult to get vitamin D. So when the days are long, make the most of it. And when the days are getting longer, you have no reason not to feel optimistic every single day. You know, I tend to feel more pessimistic as I head into winter because I know it's going to be long, dark, cold nights, and it's kind of dark before you finish work, which is always disheartening and miserable. So now that I know that we're heading into the longer days and there's more daylight on the way and more sunlight on the way, hopefully, I start to feel better, more optimistic, and feel gooder. I feel gooder about things. So I hope you can all take part in that optimism and find a reason to be cheerful. So I hope you are doing well. We have got a few people in the crowd already over on Rumble. We've got Heidi and Turbs, and Turbs is threatening us with being quiet tonight because she's not quite sober. Well, don't worry about that, Turbs, because I have a beer here. Cheers to you for being in the crowd. And there's a sip to toast the very happy fact that the days are going to be getting longer from now on, and just that we're alive and we have this amazing technology and we get to communicate to each other, and I get to put the show on and people show up. It is incredibly amazing to me every single time I do this. So we've got Heidi and we've got Turbs. I hope you're doing well. Over on YouTube, we have Frank, Elizabeth, Gwen, Rose, and Matteo, which is wonderful to see you all over on YouTube. And it's crickets over on Odyssey, which is a shame because I think out of those three platforms, Odyssey is probably the one that's more free speech friendly and has more likelihood to preserve the content that we make on this channel. Although I haven't had any problems with strikes and censorship. There may be some shadow banning going on, but I don't know. I can't tell. I don't think the numbers are particularly reliable over on YouTube. I think they're cooked. And so the fact that the subscribers are ticking up nicely, that's good. I don't know what it means, whether it's true. But if you are into what I do and you enjoy it and get some value from it, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, all that good stuff. Is there somebody out there, somebody in your life, somebody in your circle who could benefit from this information and this knowledge? You might send them a link. You might let them know that there is information out there that is pretty reliable, well-referenced and backed up and well-researched, and it's in these really strange, kind of antiquated, hard to find gadgets called books. Yeah, books. You know, some people out there, you might know people who don't know what books are, and you can introduce them to that most amazing of technology and tell them that in the past people actually wrote things down in books, things that you can't cram into a 30-second TikTok or 240 character tweet. Sometimes things are complicated, things are nuanced, there's a lot of detail, and it takes a while to explain. And so people would put words, many words, many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of words in a very specific order in order to communicate something that was hard to say in a soundbite or a snippet. And they would write that down, and they would have a machine press those words onto pieces of paper and bind them together and put a nice, well, in this case, there's not a particularly great deal of creativity gone into the front cover, but some of them have good front covers, like this one that I'm reading here. has a picture of Manson on it because the book's about Manson, right? This is chaos. This is my bedtime reading at the minute. It's quite interesting. It's very easygoing. Reads like a hard-boiled crime thriller. So I tend to polish off a few pages of that before I go to sleep at night. But yes, if you know somebody out there who might be skeptical, be suspicious of maybe the New World Order, maybe some of the conspiracy theories that they think you're slinging their way, you can always point them towards this channel and say, hey, there's books that explain all this stuff if you but care to read them. And if you can't be bothered to read them, Hayes Reviews is on YouTube and he's reading them for you, and you can go and check out his stuff and jump to the timestamps under the videos if you don't want to hear him wittering on at the beginning. Or you can even listen to him on 1.5 or even 2 speed if you want to get that information quickly, right? So all that good stuff. If you feel so willing, then liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing, it's very much appreciated. We've got LJ in the chat as well on YouTube. Hello to you. Hope you're doing very well. I saw you left me a comment on my SoundCloud, which I much appreciated, and I'm glad you enjoyed the music over there. Certainly, I enjoyed making it, and I enjoyed playing it and singing it as well. So tonight, we're going to be learning about the UN, which is a topic that we've covered on this channel before. And in fact, we have covered this topic on Rumble, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you go to the playlists tab, you will find a playlist there entitled The Fearful Master by G. Edward Griffin. In the videos on that playlist, we read through this little paperback book here. It's a really tiny paperback book. To give it a comparison, it's smaller than the one we're reading at the moment by quite a bit, and it's much thinner, as you can see. But is no less important, no less interesting, and no less fantastic, and quite rare and hard to get hold of, as is the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. You're going to have to pay a bit of money to get these books at this point. They don't seem to be printing new copies. There are copies out there, but not easily available, not widely available. You could probably find electronic copies very easily, but if you want the physical copy, you're going to have a bit of a budget to get them. So we have read through The Fearful Master, and that did deal with the topic of the UN in quite a bit of detail. Certainly for me, threw a lot of light onto the UN and some history of that organization, which I was totally unaware of prior to reading the book. Okay. So I would recommend that people go and check out that playlist. I've got a couple of tabs to go through for the preamble ramble this evening, but it's more of a recap, a revisit to the things that we talked about back on that playlist. But I think they're worth getting on the record here. And for the benefit of anyone who hasn't checked out the Fearful Master reading, then you're going to have something to contextualize what we're about to read tonight. So with that said, let's pop over here. And here's my YouTube channel. And if you go to the playlist tab here, you can see it's the book we read before this one, in fact. It's right there, The Fearful Master by G. Edward Griffin. If you hit that button, then you will get this. It's an 11-part series, and each one of these is 3 hours long, thereabouts. And we covered quite a lot. And if you, again, go down to the pinned comment, I've got timestamps there, and you can have a look at the kind of things that we talked about. Every video has got the timestamps underneath, so you can always go and avail yourself of that shortcut to getting to what it is that you want to see. But that was quite a fascinating book, and certainly gave me a pause, because prior to reading that, I just assumed that the United Nations was this benevolent, fantastic organization that cared only about peace and love and freedom and security for all the people in the world. That might not be the case. I'm not saying it definitely isn't the case, because I don't know. I don't work at the UN. I don't know anybody who does, and I don't really know what goes on over there. But after going through this book and doing some of the research on for the preamble rambles, we touched on Rockefeller. We touched on criticisms of the United Nations. We had a look at some of the characters who were involved in the founding and the creation of it, some of the people who ran it. There's all sorts going on, as well as looking at other people's coverage. Here I covered Jay Dyer's work on the UN, and we had a look at James Roguski as well, who's also doing some fantastic work exposing some of the agendas and the ideas, the motivations, the plans of the UN. There's this one here, which is the UN Declaration on Future Generations, and also the UN Silence Procedure. So there's a lot of good stuff in there, and maybe after this book, it would be a good follow-up for anyone who hasn't checked it out. So I wanted to let people know about that. That's also on Rumble and Odyssey as well. But for tonight's preamble, I thought we could recap Operation Rum Punch. Operation Rum Punch is what G. Edward Griffin talks about in, I would say, maybe the first third of this book. I think it's in 3 parts or 4 parts, if I remember rightly. Let's have a quick look. I think it's in 4 parts. And in part 1, he talks about this Operation Rum Punch, which is a UN operation that took part in Katanga. So I thought we could recap that, because this is the bit that it's like a case study. J. Edward Griffin refers to it as a case study, and it gives you a little more of an idea of what the UN is really about, and it's kind of the dark side of the UN. It's not just the all wonderful, uplifting, fantastic, peaceful, objective, fair nature of the UN. This is something like this actually happened, and it doesn't make the UN look particularly good. Although the Wikipedia page paints it in I'd say a positive light, or as positive as you could paint this. But let's learn a little bit about that, because Operation Rum Punch is a really good starting point when you want to dive in to a little more detail on the UN and what it's really all about. So Wikipedia tells us that Operation Rum Punch was a military action undertaken by the United Nations peacekeeping forces in 1961 against the military of the state of Katanga. So just on the face of it, upfront, obvious contradiction here, a military action by peacekeeping forces. It's this enforcing of world peace that the UN is all about. They want to force people to be peaceful. Well, that is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction. You can't force somebody to be peaceful, right? Because if you're using force against someone, that by its very nature is violence. It's coercion. It is unethical. You do not, and I do not, have the right to force other people to do anything. So how can this organization, which calls itself the UN, have that right? We can't give that right to a group of people if we do not have it ourselves to give, right? The point being that if an individual doesn't have the right to do it, then an organization calling themselves the UN or the government or the army or the military, they're made up of individuals. So if one individual does not have the right to do that, then how can a group of individuals have the right to do that? They can't. It's illogical and it's stupid and it doesn't make any sense. Yet people go along with this all the time, whether that's your national police force, whether that's the government, like I said, the army, the military. They're just human beings. And if one human being doesn't have the right to go and aggress against another and to restrict their freedom using force, violence, or coercion, then just because you're wearing a uniform and somebody pays you and you got a job and a nice little hat and some sort of title, maybe a badge, it doesn't mean you have the right to do those things, okay? Because rights don't come from human beings. We don't give each other rights. We don't create them. They're not man-made. They're not human-made. They come from somewhere else, somewhere above and beyond the domain of humanity, I think. And I think most people think that, at least if they can't accept and acknowledge that when you describe it to them, they at least act that way. Most people treat others as they would like to be treated. They're polite, they're kind, they're decent. And they don't do things that they wouldn't like to have done to themselves because they realize that they don't have the right to do that, because they have conscience. They have like an internal compass, which gives us the word compassion, right? Compass, compassion. Now, compassion is understanding this, is built on this internal recognition of the fact that we are beings and we have preferences and we don't like certain behaviors done to us, and therefore we don't do them to others, and that is the best way to ensure that those kind of behaviors do not happen. Except if you're in the UN or the military or the police. You go around doing all sorts of horrible shit all the time that you wouldn't like having done to you because somebody said you could, and you have I've totally lost connection. Hi, everybody. I think I lost my connection there. Am I back? Let me know if I'm back. Looks like I'm back. I can see numbers and lights and green things, and it tells me I'm successfully connected. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Give me a thumbs up in the chat. Say something. Obviously, our AI tech overlords don't like me talking so eloquently about the fact that nobody has the right to aggress upon other people with violence. All right, cool. We're back. And Hasdak's here. What's up? Hope you're doing well. Okay. Oh, we got Woodchopper over on Odyssey. Good evening. Good to have you here. Thank you for the feedback. Sweet. Sweet. Sounds like we're all right. I'm going to record this, and I'm just going to blast it out and do the live stream as though there's no interruptions. And if it messes up, I'm just going to upload the replay after the fact. Okay? So, Operation Rum Punch. Let's try and get through this. The UN troops, so I said before, the Operation Rum Punch, military action, UN against the military of the state of Katanga. UN troops arrested 79 foreign mercenaries and officers employed by Katanga with little conflict. Little conflict indeed. Interesting, please note the use of this word mercenaries as well, because that happens all the way through this Wikipedia page, and it is a deliberate choice of word because a mercenary is somebody who doesn't show mercy. They are aggressive. They are paid for their willingness to do violence. A mercenary does not sound like someone who is defending their community. A mercenary does not sound like somebody who is defending their society, their way of life, the land that they live upon. A mercenary sounds bad, right? And that's why they use the word. And G. Edward Griffin's book paints a very different picture of the people who were resisting the UN's movements and efforts there. But we get the word mercenaries all the way through this, so just take that with a pinch of salt. So the background is that this was part of the Congo crisis, which was after the Republic of Congo became independent from Belgium. So this kind of ties in and echoes what happened in the UK with the dismantling of the British Empire and the transformation of it into the Commonwealth, which was something that was supported and encouraged by the Fabian Society, who were key players in in the book that we're reading tonight. It was this idea that okay, we can't keep going with the system that we have, this one of like domination and control and colonialism. So we need to transform it into something else. And instead of calling it the British Empire, we're going to give sovereignty back to the countries and have them govern themselves and show them how to do that. And basically it marks a transformation in the plans and the systems of the people who are running these games, these cons on the rest of us, the masters of conology, as Alan Watt would say. Okay, so this pattern of countries becoming independent of their colonial controllers, that is one which we see quite a lot of. I just went to the wrong Wikipedia page there. And it's a very important thing to bear in mind just for the history and the context of this time. So that's what happened, and it led to a crisis. And Katanga was important because it contained the vast majority of the Congo's valuable mineral resources and had attracted significant mining activity under Belgian rule. So the Belgians had gone there, they'd been interested in exploiting the mineral resources, and they invested in the area and set up the mines and were doing their colonial thing. Many Katangese thought that they were entitled to the revenue generated through the lucrative industry and feared that under the new central government led by Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba, it would be redistributed among the Congo's poorer provinces. So they had a good reason to fear that, because Patrice Lumumba was an open and avowed communist. He was a massive sympathizer of socialism and the Socialist International and these ideas of wealth distribution, which of course just means taking from one person and giving to another. And if you're going to do that, you have to do it using force, threats, violence, coercion. And I talked about that at the beginning of the stream tonight. So these people in Katanga, they were saying, well, we've got the resources and we're doing the work and we're doing the heavy lifting with regards to getting it out of the ground and processing it and selling it on. We should have a fair share of that revenue because it's our business and that's what we're engaged in. And they were worried that this communist, Patrice Lumumba, would deny them that and would redistribute among the Congo's poorer provinces, which sounds like a good thing on the face of it, right? Because it sounds like helping poor people, which I think a lot of people, they like socialism and they like communism because it tells you that it's going to help poor people. But it doesn't tell you, and they sort of hide and gloss over the fact that they're going to forcefully redistribute wealth, which means taking and stealing from one group and giving to another group. And who has the right to do that? Nobody. Nobody has the right to do that. I don't have the right. You don't have the right. Nobody has the right to do that, okay? So that was going on in the Congo in the 60s, and it led to this crisis. And the ruling party in the Katangese provincial government blamed Lumumba and his alleged communist sympathies for the collapse in order. So this is where Wikipedia's bias is showing through. Jerry Griffin, in the book The Fearful Master, establishes really without a shadow of a doubt that Lumumba was not sympathetic to communism, but was enthusiastically in bed and aligned with communism because he was going over to the USSR and he was being wined and dined. He was having money sent to him to prop up and support his efforts. It really wasn't controversial, and it wasn't something that was sort of in dispute. But Wikipedia will tell you that alleged communist sympathies. That's what he had. But I think that's quite a dismissive way to refer to what was quite a strong communist leaning on behalf of Lumumba. And Lumumba had a sort of rival, a sort of counterpart, who was a gentleman called Moise Tshombe, and he was president of Katanga province, and he was citing the collapse of order in the Congo and the threat of a communist takeover. And because he saw this coming and he saw it was going to happen, he declared the independence of the state of Katanga and he appealed for Belgian assistance. So Moise Tshombe was not sympathetic with communism and the Soviet and the socialist system way of doing things. He was more sympathetic with the Belgian way of doing things, the industry, the setting up of businesses and using their natural resources to enrich the lives of the people who lived in Katanga. Okay, so he was standing up against Lumumba and his communist socialist sympathies. On the 12th of July, Lumumba and President Joseph Kasavubu appealed to the United Nations, requesting that international troops be dispatched to the Congo to replace the Belgian forces and re-establish order. So it was the communist-leaning Lumumba who appealed to the United Nations and got support and got help. The UN Security Council complied, passing several resolutions calling for the withdrawal of Belgian troops and establishing a large multinational peacekeeping mission, the United Nations Operation in the Congo, and that was known by its French acronym ONUC, O-N-U-C. So, in other words, the United Nations were sympathetic to the communist, Lumumba, and recognized but treated the democratically elected president of Katanga province, Tshombe, as an aggressor and his supporters as mercenaries. Okay, Moise Tshombe wanted the state of Katanga to be separate, to be self-governing, to be self-ruling, to be free from the large centralized government that was being set up in the rest of the Congo. That's all they wanted. We'll do our thing over here. We'll take care of ourselves. Leave us alone, please. United Nations step in. No, you're not allowed to be left alone. Lumumba then demanded that ONUC troops be used to forcibly put down the Katangese secession. So this Lumumba character, he wanted the United Nations troops to stop the Katangese secession because he recognized that if his centralized socialistic Republic of the Congo government was to be successful, and if he himself was to get rich and his cronies and his friends, they were going to need those mineral resources and that wealth in Katanga, right? Because this is the way the system works, and this is what is always left out from people who advocate socialism and communism, is you need this layer of bureaucracy and bureaucrats to run the system and say where everything goes. And obviously they're going to give themselves the lion's share and the best portion of what's available, right? They're going to collect it all in. They say, we're doing the smart, intelligent work. You need to rely on us, and we're helping you by redistributing all this wealth. Therefore, we need to make sure that we get the best part of the wealth ourselves. So Lumumba is going to have his eyes on this material, this resource that is a natural resource that's held in Katanga, this mineral wealth in Katanga. He wants to get that, distribute it to his friends, maybe his friends over in the USSR, his communist friends elsewhere, rather than the Belgians who were encouraging the people who lived there to build industry and for the people who lived there to get wealthy off this natural resource. Okay, so Lumumba calls on the UN to forcibly stop the Katangese secession. The Security Council resolved on the 9th of August that, quote, the entry of the United Nations force into the province of Katanga is necessary for the full implementation of this resolution. And they also decided that the United Nations force in the Congo will not be a party to or in any way intervene in or be used to influence the outcome of any internal conflict. Yes, right. Frustrated, Lumumba appealed to Eastern Bloc nations for military assistance, resulting in a conflict with Kasavubu and ultimately his removal from power and eventual murder. Because that's always the way it happens. Everybody who supports and helps to advance the plans and the agendas of communists and socialists end up getting killed. They're the first ones to get killed, because if they turn so easily on the current ruling authorities, then they're going to turn again just as easily on the next ruling authorities, even if they helped get them in. It's always the helpers and the most zealous advocates of communism and socialism who get clipped first once power is established, right? Historically speaking, that is. So that's a little background, and that's a little info about Operation Rum Punch. It goes on. There's plenty of information, but the outcome of this whole tension, this whole situation with Tshombe and Lumumba on each side was a bit of a bloodbath. Honestly, it didn't go very well. It ended up in lots of rape, murder, indiscriminate killing, deliberate targeting of Red Cross hospitals and vehicles, people going missing, and the UN peacekeeping force that was sent there ended up just causing absolute havoc. And they were doing that in the name of what exactly? Well, in the name of ensuring that those resources would be distributed according to a communist, socialistic way of thinking. Okay, looks like we got plutonium productions and Bitcoin mining in the YouTube. I hope it's stabilized a little bit, and things are kind of coming through more reliably at this point. We shall see. We're going to carry on anyway. I've got another tab here to show you before we get into tonight's reading of the book. And I can hear the wind going crazy outside, actually. So I think the storm is probably the most likely culprit for why the connection isn't so good. But let's go back over here and have a look at the Wikipedia page detailing criticism of the United Nations. So this is mainstream stuff. It's on Wikipedia. It is avowed. It is accepted. It is admitted. So the criticism of the United Nations, the thing that blew my mind about this page is the number one top thing on the list. And this is a long page. I'll just give you a quick tour. It's a really long page. There's a lot of criticisms of the UN. But the number one top thing is moral relativism. Moral relativism. This is such a dangerous, disgusting, despicable way of viewing the world, and it is taught to most people, and it is tied up with atheistic materialism. It is tied up with scientism. You know, you've got Einstein with his theory of relativism, relativity, E equals mc squared. It's like the one scientific formula that is ingrained in the minds of pretty much everybody on the planet, although most of us probably can't explain it or tell you what it means. But it's become this sort of precious, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Golden cow of it's a symbol, I would say. Actually, it's more like a symbol of intelligence, of the superiority of the scientific method, the peak of enlightened scientific thinking. E equals mc squared. Einstein came up with that, and he was the smartest man who ever lived, right? Well, maybe, but tied up in that is this idea of relativity, of relativism. And moral relativism is the idea that what's right for you could be wrong for me, and what's wrong for you could be right for me. And it links to what I was saying in the previous part of the preamble ramble tonight, which was all about how can a police officer have the right to kidnap someone and chuck him in the back of a van and chuck him in a cage for 48 hours, and yet you and I do not have that right. And most people will say, yeah, well, I'm not allowed to kidnap someone and stick him in a cage for 48 hours. But if I get a job as a policeman and then I wear the uniform and I'm on duty and I'm getting paid, then I have the right to kidnap people and stick them in a cage for 48 hours. It's like, how does that work? Either all humans have the same rights or they don't. And this is relativism. So some are more equal than others. The famous quote from George Orwell's fantastic book Animal Farm. Some are more equal than others. Some people have rights that other people don't have, but this is illogical. It's nonsensical. It is ridiculous, and you're dumb if you think that's the case. And anyone who thinks that's the case, this is one of the easiest ways to talk to people about these kinds of topics, right? Because moral relativism is such an easy thing to debunk, and you can get people through just a few questions, you can get people to refute it themselves, and you can tie them into a contradiction, and they have to admit that, yeah, actually, it doesn't make any sense that one group of people has rights that another group does not have. The government has a bunch of rights just because they get together and call themselves government, but they have a bunch of rights that you as an individual human being do not have. It doesn't make any sense. Right? That's not how rights work. So it's not surprising to see moral relativism at the top of the list. Moral relativism allows for things like soldiers who go and murder people in other countries and think that it's a reasonable thing to do, and it's okay to do that because somebody told them that they're not responsible for it. It's belief in authority, belief that it's okay to do things that you wouldn't have done to yourself if somebody in a white coat tells you to do it, right? It's okay to electrocute people to the point of death if somebody with a clipboard and a white coat tells you, don't worry, you will not be held responsible for the outcome of this experiment. Keep administering the electric shocks. And if anyone knows what I'm referring to there, the name of the experiment, chuck it in the chat, and I'll give you and I'll take a sip of my beer. But yeah, moral relativism, there it is, top of the list on Wikipedia's article about the criticism of the United Nations. Very telling, very important. And the reference that they've used is a book called Tower of Babel, How the United Nations Has Fueled Global Chaos. Do I have a copy of it? You bet I do. It's right here. Tower of Babel. Look at that. Let's go over to this cam so you can have a better look. How the United Nations Has Fueled Global Chaos. That's from somebody called Dor Gold. And nice little hardback book. Let's have a look. When was this out? This was published in 2004. And I forgot I had this, actually. So that would be a good one to read. Let's see if there's a warning on the inside about electronically, digitally reproducing it. Yes, there is. Bugger. Oh, well. But there you are, Tower of Babel. That's a book you can get. And yes, the Milgram experiment, that is the experiment that I was referring to. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Bitcoin Mining. And because both of you got the answer correct, I'll have 2 sips. Ah, delicious. So let's get back to our criticism of the United Nations. Top of the list, moral relativism. Second on the list, threat to national sovereignty. Well, we don't need nations, do we? We don't need nations. National sovereignty, what's that ever done for anyone? You might have a point if you hold that position, because pretty much all a nation is just a holding pen in which people are farmed for their labor or their tax. You know, that's basically what a nation is. It's just a holding pen for human beings to be farmed, experimented on, abused, exploited, and all that other stuff. But some people think that some nations are better than others. And it would be a good thing to have strong borders. And if you have strong borders, then at least you can work on improving what's going on inside your country. So if you have a nation and it's sovereign and the borders are there and they're respected, then you might have a chance of defending those borders and building up something pretty nice and cozy and decent on the inside of those borders. But if you do away with all that and you get rid of the borders, you make them porous and you start mixing together all the world's people, then you begin to drag the culture down to the common denominator. And what do you think the common denominator is for the world's people when it comes to culture and living standards and income level? It's not very good. I'll tell you that right now. I think it's something like, I don't know, it'd be a couple of dollars a day or something if you average it out. That's kind of what they're heading for. Bitcoin mining is accusing me of having a swig. How dare you, sir? Or madam. I don't know if you're a sir or a madam, so I won't assume. Oh, we got ESP as well over on Odyssey. Fantastic. Hope you're doing well. So, moral relativism, threat to national sovereignty. Debates surrounding population control and abortion. This is a very strong contender, very key part of the puzzle. Quite amazing when you start looking at who is talking about these subjects again and again, time and time again. These thinkers who were lauded 100 years ago, Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells, the Huxleys, always banging on about the population problem. And there's too many people, but they don't mean there's too many of themselves. They're quite happy for them and their families and friends to carry on going as they would be and having children and continuing their lineage. It's the rest of us. There's too many of the rest of us. But the population problem, that comes up all the time in the writings of these globalist scum parasites. For example, First Global Revolution, report from the Club of Rome. That's a very key text, a very important one that we should read on the channel, I think, at some point. Haven't read that one through yet, but I think that would be a good one. As well as that, you've also got, and I love the title of this one, Life Without Birth by Stanley Johnson, the father of Boris Johnson. Yes, he did write a book called Life Without Birth, which is exactly what Aldous Huxley described in Brave New World. That is life without birth, because nobody there is born. Or some people are, but they're held away from the main society in a little holding pen, and you can go and visit it and like laugh at them. And people find it incredibly amusing, and they're also shocked and taken aback if you reveal that you were actually born naturally. It's kind of like in the film The Matrix, where Neo talks to, I think the character's called Tank. There's brothers, Tank and Dozer, and he says to him, "Oh, you don't have any holes, you know," because they have all these holes where the machines get plugged into. And he says, "No, I don't have any holes because I was born here, genuine child of Zion," which is the city where all the humans live. He was born in the real world. He wasn't born in a test tube. He wasn't born linked up to a machine and fed with the liquefied remains of other humans, which I think is what happens in the Matrix film, if my memory serves me correct. So a life without birth, that's the plan. On in 3 words, that is the plan. And Stanley Johnson was writing about this back in, let's have a look, when did this one come out? 1970. So that's another good one. So they're always going on about population and how there's too many people and we need to control the numbers. And so not at all surprising to find out that the UN has been criticized for its position and its stance on population control and abortion. So administrative criticisms, moving on, the role of elite countries. So even though the UN is supposed to be about bringing equality to all the world's countries, there's 5 permanent members who have all the power and hold all the sway. So that sounds very equal, doesn't it? Membership in the UN Security Council, it's been criticized for this because people have said it's inadequate, and the smaller countries don't get as much of a vote, don't get as much influence, power to veto things, power to get resolutions put through. Again, as we said earlier, some countries are more equal than others, and that's the veto power there. Also under criticism. Apparently it's not gender inclusive enough. Terrible. The democratic charter of the UN, the character of the UN. Critics object to the idea that the UN is democratic, saying that it represents the interests of the governments of the countries who form it and not the individuals within those countries. Yeah, great. Criticism makes perfect sense because governments do not anywhere ever represent the individuals in the country, right? There's like, and yeah, I'm sorry to burst your bubble if you thought they did, but it's not true. The UN Security Council has also been criticized of being corrupt. So effectiveness, there's been criticisms about how effective it is. They've been told that they have an inability to prevent conflicts. They were criticized for the handling of the Cold War and criticized of the attention given to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And they've been accused, of course, of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. There's a whole separate page on UNESCO and Israel there. And it's been accused of supporting Palestinian militancy. Then they've had scandals, oil for food program scandal, peacekeeping child sexual abuse scandal. So quite a big list of criticisms. So it's not conspiracy theory to be reading a chapter tonight that is going to be telling us that the UN is a scam. It's admitted that there are problems with the UN. It's been described as a paper tiger, and I've mentioned this before that right now it's a paper tiger, but it is gaining in prestige, in influence. More countries are joining it. Will it remain a paper tiger forever? Let's see. All we can do is wait and see. But there's just 2 resources for your consideration. Good place to start if you are new to the idea that the UN might not be a benevolent, wonderful organization that loves and cares about you and your friends and your grandmother and your grandfather, for that matter. You can start with Operation Rum Punch, and you can have a look at this criticism of the United Nations, both on Wikipedia, free to access, and there's no reason to doubt the information on this, but there is a lot of reason to doubt that they're not telling you to doubt their willingness to tell you the full story. I think the way Wikipedia works is it gives you a little bit of truth, but it's a gatekeeper, and it's not going to give you the whole truth. It's going to leave certain things out. It's going to paint things with bias and in a certain light. So we'll always bear that in mind when having a look. But, I got a book recommendation from this, Tower of Babel. And I grabbed that book, and I haven't read it yet, but it's on my shelf waiting to go. So always worth checking in with Wikipedia. And so, with that, that's all I got for the preamble ramble tonight. And we're going to dive straight into the book and read the chapter. The chapter's about 30 pages long, so we should be able to get it all done, I think, by the end of the video. Before we do that, I'll just remind people that you can support the show at any moment. You can even support the show when I'm not live streaming by going to allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews, and there you can find everything you might need. You can find my email address if you want to get in touch. You can find ways to send a one-off donation or a monthly if you would like to do that. You can send crypto, but more importantly, you can find out where I communicate with the world. Telegram and Instagram is probably the place where I communicate most. Twixter, I don't go on there too much. It's just another one of those platforms. I don't have enough time, not enough hours in the day to spread myself so thinly on all these platforms to make a meaningful contribution. But Telegram and Instagram, I do put stuff out fairly regularly. The live streams go on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and Entropy. Sign up and subscribe and join those places in case one ever gets nuked. We will live on in another place. You can listen to my album, Brave New World Order. That's over on SoundCloud. LJ can attest that there is at least one good song on that album because she left a comment on it saying it was good. So get in there, listen to it, see if you can find that one song that is good. And and that would be cool. And then at the very top, we've got the free community, which is my community, Devised. That's over on the School platform. I call it a free community for tech skeptics. And the whole point of this community is for us to get together and to start to understand the problem of screen addiction and figure out what we can do about it. I'm very, very interested in this problem at the moment, and I am doing my own reading and research. I've finished one book. I've just started the second book, all about internet addiction, addiction in general, and screens, and what we can do about it. And so if you are interested in support, having somebody to talk to, discussing these ideas, doing some more learning around the topic, if there's someone in your life you would like to help, or maybe you yourself are finding that you're having a difficulty managing your relationship to screens because they are, they're created and made to be extremely addictive and attention grabbing and time consuming. So don't be blaming yourself or giving yourself a hard time if you're finding it hard to put the thing down, or if you're staying up late at night stared to the screen. It's like it's built to be that way. It's made to hijack your biology, and it is made to interfere with our ability to lead fulfilling, satisfied lives where we have meaningful relationships with the human beings around us. These are weapons. These are tools of the parasites that are there to divide people and tear apart families and communities and marriages and relationships between friends, parents, children, all of that. It's incredibly insidious, and it's a huge problem. It's the biggest problem that I feel I can make a meaningful contribution to. So if you join up the Devised platform community, what you will get is links to join our Screenaholics Anonymous meetings. This is just a hangout. It's not recorded, and there's no script, and there's no plan. Get together, support each other, share stories, share resources, and offer a space with no judgment to explore this issue in any way that you feel moved to do so. We're also going to have a book club, and in the book club, I've picked a few books, and they're on the screen now on this picture. So the books that I want to read in the book club are the first one is The 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television. This was written in the 70s, a whole book about why we should ditch the television. So I'm really excited to read that, and I thought we could do that together in a book club where I'll read through a chapter, and then we can have a sort of roundtable discussion about the contents to paint that picture and maybe expand on what we've learned and maybe see how that information holds up. Then we're going to have a look at Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is a classic book from the 80s about how entertainment is ruining us as a society, as a species. Then we got Surveillance Valley, which is Yasha Levine's book all about the military origins of the internet. Like, not everybody, some people think that the internet's just this amazing technological invention that we were just given because we're at the cutting edge of development and technological progress has brought us this incredible thing called the internet, without knowing that it was actually a creation of the US military. And it was given to us on purpose, and it was designed for a very specific purpose. And I'll tell you that purpose. The clue is in the name. Internet, World Wide Web. It's a net. It's a web. Okay? That's all you need to know, really. But there's a lot more detail, a lot more information about that in Yasha Levine's book. So that's another one we're going to read. And then finally, we got Technological Slavery by Theodore Krasinski. I've never read any of his stuff. I haven't read any of these before. So these are just 4 books that I thought we could start reading in a group, have a little group study book session. That's the curriculum. And then we can take it from there, right? We can sort of see where the group wants to go, what else is going to be interesting and useful for us, because this is a massive topic, and I'm sure there is much to learn. So those sessions, the book club sessions, they will be recorded, and they'll go into the bank, the vault, which will be accessible to anybody who's in the community. So we'll be building up this resource of information and intelligent, heartfelt discussions of that'll benefit future members of the community. So you'll be taking part in that, which is a really good thing to do. I think there can never be enough intelligent conversation exploring the most important issues of the day. So that is, then the third thing is you get to join my private group chat channel on Telegram, where I hang out and I contribute and talk pretty much every single day. Got a really nice group of people in there already who are very well read and knowledgeable and interested in intelligent conversations about reality. We're not really interested in the conspiratainment. We're not really interested in the link slinging. Oh my God, have you seen this latest thing? And you can't believe what they said now. And I can't believe they just did that. No, we're not looking for that. We're not looking for fear mongering. We're not looking to scare ourselves and each other, right? We just want to uplift each other with some knowledge, some information, some calm, rational, decent analysis, and practical steps about what can be done. So, Adam, good evening. And Celine Lyon, good evening. You are asking, are we still on the preamble, amble? No, we're about to get into the book reading, so you got here just on time. Adam says, as much as I want to not expose my children to TV, you'd be stripping them from a cultural connection with friends. It's a difficult one. Yes, exactly. So that is exactly one of the top topics that we could discuss in Deviced. I would love to explore that one and discuss, because I don't have all the answers, you know. That's why I wanted to have a community and learn from you, because I'm sure, you know, I sit here with the mic and do my broadcast, but sometimes I wish there was a two-way thing going on, so I could benefit from your life stories and experiences and knowledge, because it's not all about me, is it really? So that is for anyone who's interested. School.com/Deviced. The URL is there, but you can also find that at the top of my links page, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. And that is the end of the preamble ramble for tonight. We're going to get into the book very shortly. I'm just going to move some things around over here. Frank Lennon says that Surveillance Valley is a very good book. And I tend to believe Frank when he weighs in on whether or not a book is any good. He says Surveillance Valley is excellent, in fact. So that's good enough for me. That makes me want to read it even more. Although I have heard good things about it pretty much from every angle. ESP says, where is the line drawn for useless eaters? Going back to the population question, it's a double-edged thing, isn't it? Because we're being assaulted and dumbed down and turned into useless eaters at the same time as being told there's too many of you and you're useless and we need to get rid of you. So it's like they're called the problem. You know, if you educated people, if you taught people how to grow food, how to follow creative pursuit, how to build businesses, how to be of utility to the people in their community around them, if everybody got that education, there wouldn't be these problems. But it's because we are conditioned to be only useful to employers and this increasingly centralized cabal of powerful, influential maniacs. That strips us of our humanity in a lot of ways, and thus renders us what Yuval Noah Harari might call a useless eater, or the useless class. He actually used the phrase "the useless class," and he said he's just going to give us all drugs and computer games. So if you're into your drugs and computer games, that might be good news for you. ESP also says Roger Waters made an album called Amused to Death. I didn't know that. Thank you. I actually got Dark Side of the Moon. I found it on CD. I was listening to that in my car just yesterday. Great album. Bitcoin Mining says 2 billion. I think this is in reference to the population question. MIT professor says is manageable for their type of democracy. Dennis Meadows says, okay, so they're aiming for 2 billion. So they got to get rid of what, 6 billion? Okay, let's try and not be part of the 6 billion that are going to be deleted. Plutonium Productions talking about dogma and the dogma of science. Yeah, and the good video for that is Rupert Sheldrake's banned TED Talk, which was and he also wrote a book called The Science Delusion, and he talks about the unquestioned, axiomatic, dogmatic presuppositions of science that exist, and if you question them, you get banned from YouTube and you get your career severely disabled. You get you don't get grants, you don't get funding, you don't get doors opening up to you and extra opportunities. You get doors slammed in your face. But yeah. Bitcoin says, can we drink during those sessions? I am fine for people to drink during any session, because just because you're under the influence of a substance doesn't mean you're not responsible for your actions and your behavior. So as long as you're being excellent to other people and a decent human being, it doesn't matter what's in your system as far as I'm concerned. But if it's disruptive, if you're causing chaos and it's getting in the way of other people being able to benefit, from the session, then, it's a problem. But those two things aren't necessarily connected. You can turn up drunk, and if you still contribute in a meaningful way that's helpful and beneficial to everybody else, then it doesn't matter whether or not you're drunk, right? Plutonian Productions points out, having a screen addiction community on a screen. Yes, I know. It's tricky, but you got to start somewhere. And if you're already addicted to screens, obviously the number one solution is to put your screen down, go outside, stop looking at the screen. But a lot of people aren't ready to do that. A lot of people need some guidance, support, some encouragement, some help to make that to make that cold turkey change in their life. Okay. Now, some people can do cold turkey with things very easily. Cigarettes, for example. Stop smoking. Just stop smoking. Right. Other people need patches. Other people need hypnotism. Some people, I needed a little bamboo inhaler that I put essential oil into, and I got a hit of peppermint essential oil, and it had this clicking rotational cylinder, and I could fiddle with that, right? And that helped me get through my withdrawal. And I quit. I tried to quit many times, but that was the one little tool that I needed to help me quit. So the whole point of having a screen addiction community on a screen is for people who aren't ready to get rid of the screen yet, but still want to take productive, proactive steps in the direction of solving that problem for themselves and others. And so that is why I'm very aware of the irony, but that is why I still think it would be valuable and will be beneficial to do it anyway, right? Celine Lyon says, pseudoscience replaced old school religion. Scientism is one of the main religions now, though, isn't it? Straight up scientism. Frank Lennon says, under the influence of alcohol. Oh, and I'm not worrying my sluds. On that note, I'll take a swig. We'll go to the book cam and we'll get into tonight's reading. Notice I said swig there instead of sip. Delicious. All right, let's do it. Let's find out what Ioan Ratiu has to say about our benevolent enforcers of peace, the UN. It still makes me chuckle every time I see it, the enforcement of peace. Okay, the UN scam. The United Nations is an international organization which, according to its charter, aims to prevent war, promote human rights, enforce international law, and promote social progress. However, critics of the UN have described it as a, quote, giant international bureaucracy with tentacles reaching into every sphere of human activity. And you'll see there that the quote, the reference for that quote is Griffin. It's from this book, The Fearful Master, Second Look at the United Nations, which I encourage people to check out. So, why the UN is a scam? A scam is a trick, swindle, or fraud. It is a scheme that represents a thing as what it is not, particularly for the purpose of cheating others of things that rightfully belong to them, such as money, freedom, identity, etc. As shown above, the United Nations precursor, the League of Nations, was created in 1919 by certain business and political interests represented by the Milner Group and the Fabian Society. The creation of the United Nations was instigated by the same vested interests as those behind the League. For example, the preamble to the UN Charter was written by General Jan Smuts, a member of the Milner Group, who had also been involved in the creation of the League of Nations. In brief, here are some key points which help us understand the fraudulent nature of the UN. 1. As the international economic and political system was dominated by self-appointed elite groups which exploited it for their own ends, the organization they created was not one working for the common good of the human race, but one serving the interests of the elites who created and dominated or controlled it. 2. Like its predecessor, the UN was created as an instrument for world government. 3. The UN was not based on equality among nations. Germany, a major European nation, was excluded from the permanent members group even after the war. Indeed, like the League of Nations, the UN was conceived as an anti-German organization, the phrase United Nations being first applied to Germany's allied opponents in World War II. As a result, the UN became a new system of oppression in which Germany and Eastern Europe were subordinated to foreign interests and turned into virtual colonies of communist Russia and its Western allies. Wow, that's an interesting point. I didn't know that the United Nations was a label first used to describe the Allies in World War II. Germany has certainly not benefited. I have a friend in Germany, and a lot of stuff that's going on in the UK is similar in Germany, if not worse. So they definitely haven't benefited. Okay, on the list, continuing. 4. The UN's 5 permanent members, Britain, USA, Russia, China, and France, are among the world's largest arms exporting countries, including to rogue states, which severely undermines the UN's claim to being an organization working for world peace. That's a great point as well. The origins of the UN. The unification of all Christian lands under one universal monarch had already become a political objective during the Middle Ages. However, with the retreat of Christianity, world organization fell into the hands of left-wing internationalists. British liberal capitalists and their Fabian socialist collaborators were particularly specific about their plans. In 1900, H.G. Wells proposed an Anglo-American new republic leading to a world state. As noted above, it was left-wing groups like the Milner Group and the Fabian Society who took up the idea and put it into practice with the creation of the League of Nations. While Milnerites stressed closer association with liberal America, with which they had close economic links, Fabians were particularly keen on closer ties with Soviet Russia, their model Fabian state. However, Russia was a large country with important natural resources, which international business interests wanted to incorporate into their global economic system. Since the 1917 Communist Revolution, it was also a brutally oppressive society with a dysfunctional economy which only survived thanks to British and American cooperation in the form of financial aid, investments, trade agreements, and technical assistance instigated by the same Anglo-American Milner-Fabian groups and their financial backers like Lazard Brothers & Co. and J.P. Morgan, which had been behind the revolution. While conservative attitudes to Russia had been generally hostile after the revolution, the British left began to push for trade relations and diplomatic recognition of the communist regime almost from the start, leading to the Anglo-Soviet Trade Agreement of 1921 under Liberal Lloyd George and diplomatic relations in 1924 under Labour's Ramsay MacDonald. Moreover, the Labour Party's Fabian founders looked on communist Russia as a model Fabian state. In 1931 and 1932, they visited Stalin and returned full of appreciation for his dictatorship, which they praised as a new civilization to be emulated by the world. In 1932, leading pro-communist Fabians like Sir Stafford Cripps, later president of the Fabian Society, set up the Socialist League to campaign for closer association of Britain with communist Russia as a front against fascism, and this became a central plank in the Labour Party's foreign policy. By 1940, Prime Minister Winston Churchill had also come to advocate an alliance between Britain and Russia, appointing Cripps ambassador to Moscow. In August 1941, Churchill and US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who, following the British Fabian lead, had recognized the Soviet Union in 1933, resolved to create a new international organization to secure peace and establish a system of general security. The US-British plan for an international organization was endorsed by Russia and China in October 1943. Together with France, which was included later, this group represented the five powers which were to dominate the new organization, though. In reality, the true power holders remained the big three: America, Britain, and Russia. The US-British plan led to the founding of the United Nations at the Dumbarton Oaks Conference of August to October 1944. The UN Charter or Constitution was created at the San Francisco Conference of 25th of April to the 26th of June 1945 and ratified in London on 24th of October 1945. The UN and Socialist Internationalism. It is essential to note that the UN was a socialist left-wing organization from inception. Its permanent founding members being socialist-dominated Britain, Socialist Marxist-Leninist Russia, Liberal Democratic USA under Democrat and New Deal author Roosevelt, Socialist France under Charles de Gaulle's coalition government of Communists, Socialists and Christian Democrats, and National Socialist China under Red General Chiang Kai-shek. The socialist domination of the UN increased with the coming to power of Socialist Prime Minister Clement Attlee in Britain, 1945. Socialist President Félix Gouin in France, 1947, and the Moscow-appointed Socialist Chairman of the Central Executive Committee, Mao Zedong, in the People's Republic of China, which joined the UN in 1971, replacing the Republic of China. Indeed, the UN was not only dominated by socialists, it was entirely run by socialists. From the outset, the post of UN President was occupied by socialists, with the appointment of 1946 of leading Belgian socialist Paul-Henri Spaak. The post of Secretary General was also occupied by socialists. Trygve Lie, a leading figure in the Norwegian Labour Party, Dag Hammarskjöld, former Foreign Secretary in Sweden's socialist government, outspoken socialist and supporter of Maoist China, U Thant, pro-Soviet and pro-Maoist China, etc. Other key posts in the UN were also given to socialists. For example, the post of Under Secretary General for Political and Security Council Affairs between 1946 and 1992 was held by Soviet Russians, with the exception of 1954 to 1957, when it was held by Socialist Yugoslavia. This was no accident. The appointment of Soviet functionaries to the important post of Under Secretary General had in fact been agreed by the five powers in London in 1945. As world power number one, America was particularly responsible for this arrangement. State Secretary Edward R. Stettinius Jr., a Democrat and Roosevelt collaborator, had agreed in this matter with the Soviets. The American left was particularly involved in the UN project. In 1944 to 1945, Olga Hiss, a FBI-certified Soviet agent, was the director of the U.S. Office of Special Political Affairs, which was involved in the creation of the United Nations. Executive Secretary of the UN's founding conference at Dumbarton Oaks, Acting Secretary General of the San Francisco Conference, and a member of the steering and executive committees in charge of writing the UN Charter. Even the UN flag was designed by the communist Carl Aldo Marzani, using the emblem of the Soviet Union as a model. And the reference for that the last two paragraphs we just read, he's referencing all the way through Griffin's book. So ties in really nicely. Also, from the American left, we can gather the true reasons behind the UN. Although the stated aim of the UN was the prevention of war, a pamphlet of the US Communist Party stated, quote, "War cannot be abolished until imperialism was abolished," adding that, quote, the UN will eventually bring about the amalgamation of all nations into a single Soviet system. This was in complete agreement with the socialist position in Europe. The Socialist International declared, quote, "Democratic socialism regards the establishment of the United Nations as an important step towards an international community." It also openly admitted that its ultimate objective was world government, which was to be achieved through the UN. Dennis Healy, former chairman of the advisory committee of the Fabian International Bureau, wrote that the main objective of the 1945 to 1951 Attlee government had been the conversion of the United Nations into some form of world government. Healy explained the reasoning behind the Fabian Labour position by stating that only world government could guarantee peace, and the only way to achieve world government was, quote, "by a steady strengthening in both the scope and the authority of the United Nations." The socialists' approval of the UN as an instrument for world government is also evident from the creation in 1992 of the Commission on Global Governance by Socialist International President Willy Brandt, with the backing and financial assistance of UN Secretary-General Boutros Ghali. And the Commission on Global Governance, if you just hang with me 1 second, I'll get something that I want to show you that I've got up here. Just reminds me that I got this through in a post the other day. This is a book called Our Global Neighborhood and it's a report of the Commission on Global Governance. I fancy that. So it's a real thing. Commission on Global Governance. It's not just some figment of Ratiu's imagination. He's not just coming up with organizations and groups that don't exist. No, this is a real thing. And they've published a book called Our Global Neighborhood. And this book was published in 1995. See it here. And starts off with the concept of global governance and talks about enlightened leadership. It's got ending the threat of mass destruction. They want to demilitarize international society, which is curious. Multilateralism. The IMF and global economic stability. That must be the comedy chapter. Got something here on migration, protecting the environment, of course. It goes on. Strengthening international law. I think I haven't read this. I've just sort of skimmed through a little bit. But I think it's all about reforming and strengthening the UN. So I thought I would just mention that and let you know that that book exists. And point out that Ratiu is not just making things up when he talks about the Commission on Global Governance. They are a real group and they are publishing books. The commission was chaired by Sweden's Socialist Prime Minister Ingvar Carlsson and Commonwealth Secretary General Shridath Ramphal, and campaigned for the expansion of UN powers. Surprise, surprise. These disturbing revelations demonstrate the ideological identity between communism and democratic socialism, including Fabianism. They also enable us to establish several well-defined ideological links between socialist internationalism and internationalist monopolistic capitalism. 1. As war disrupts relations between socialist states working for world socialism as much as it disrupts international trade, world peace served the interests of both socialism and internationalist capitalism. 2. As only a world state run by a world government could guarantee world peace, world government was the aim of both socialism and monopolistic international capitalism. 3. These interests were also united in their aim to abolish capitalism. So that bit's kind of confusing, isn't it? The international capitalists would scheme and aim to abolish capitalism. But I think, again, it's not capitalism for them, it's capitalism for everybody else, right? So they'll be profiteering, they'll be raking in the dividends and the payments by virtue of their being shareholders in all the systems that we're living in. But the rest of us will be borrowing and renting and owning nothing and being happy. And eating our cricket burgers. Delicious. Oh, hang on. He's going to address this point in the next chapter, next paragraph. So, continuing. Counterintuitive though it may sound, the notion of capitalists wanting to abolish capitalism becomes perfectly logical when we consider that A, the corporate interests under discussion were not true capitalists, but advocates of monopolism, which, both in its statist and corporatist forms, seeks to abolish the plurality of business interests, forming the foundation of authentic capitalist society. And B, these interests, both socialist and capitalist, aimed to abolish capitalism for others. So I got it right. Communism states, like Soviet Russia and Maoist China, abolished capitalism, i.e. private trade and private property for the common people, but not for themselves. The state and the elites representing it carried on with trade and finance as in pre-communist times. Thus, communism did not abolish capitalism. It merely made a monopoly of the state, that is, of the ruling clique. There was an identical parallel trend in the free capitalist world to concentrate trade and finance in the hands of self-appointed elite groups. That paragraph there is really very, very important, and it's the piece of the picture that most people overlook or are unaware of or dismiss. And so take a screen grab of that is my advice. I don't have any little paper tabs. Oh, hang on. Got some sticky post-it notes. I'm going to put one of them in there. Right there, just so I can come back to this page. I should post it like that, then I can find it again. So yeah, this is so we were given, we being the television watching news believers of the public in these countries, we were given this narrative that capitalism and communism were competing systems, economic systems, and that one side hates the other side, and we have to defend ourselves. And this is the same narrative on both sides of it, right? If you were communist, you were told that capitalists hate you, and if you were capitalist, you were told the communists hate you. Like in all wars, you were told that you are the good guys, and the evil, non-human scum over there are jealous of you, and they hate you and your way of life, and they want to come after you and kill you because they're so jealous and consumed with rage and hatred for your nice house and your car and your 9-to-5 office job and your ability to go to the cinema or whatever it might be. So we were told this narrative of capitalism versus communist, red team versus blue team, right? Let's say the communists are the red team and the capitalists are the blue team. It's just another controlled dialectic. It's just another way to divide and distract people, while the real culprits, the real parasites, the real controlling scumbags carry on getting away with shafting people and hoovering up all the power and the wealth for themselves, and putting systems in place to ensure that that will continue and they will maintain that power and wealth over the long term, continuously out into the future. So that's the key thing, is that capitalism, communism was a narrative, it was a controlled dialectic. Now, that is not to say that capitalism itself, in theory, is a bad thing, right? Like he mentioned, well, he didn't mention, but he kind of hinted that this isn't pure capitalism that we're talking about here. This isn't the ability. This is capitalism for me and not for thee, right? This is monopoly capitalists, I think, is a good way to refer to these people. They wanted to consolidate and control everything for themselves. And the people who were pushing communism and the members of the Socialist International, clue is in the title, it's the Socialist International, had also this target of controlling absolutely everything for themselves, right? So that's why they had the same goal, a monopoly getting so big, and it has to keep growing and keep growing and keep growing and promising more profits, and consuming and incorporating more and hoovering up more resources and what do you call it? Acquiring smaller businesses and growing and growing and growing. And it's the same thing that a socialistic, communistic type bureaucracy would do. Just grow and grow and grow and get bloated and get bigger and bigger and bigger until it controls and consumes absolutely everything. So it's the same thing being described, just with two different words. Okay. And that's the thing that I've been trying to say since the beginning. And I think he just absolutely knocked it out of the park on this page, which was page 198. I think you might, and Frank says, excellent, page 195. Maybe when 195 was good. But 198 is an absolute humdinger. That's a keeper. I'm going to come back to that one. So really, really important page here. Grab a screen grab or pause it. And I think that's a really good one to remember and to learn and to be able to quote. Okay, so excellent. So continuing. In fact, so there's more. But wait, there's more. In fact, capitalism, trade and finance, is fundamental to any economy and cannot be abolished. However, it can be and has been monopolized by elite groups both in socialism and capitalism. Clearly, the aim of creating a single, worldwide political and economic system or world state controlled by monopolistic elites was shared by socialist politicians and capitalist business interests alike, and this explains their close collaboration. Thus, we find that leading among Western banks involved in trade and finance with the communist world were Chase Manhattan, Citibank, Bank of America, Morgan Guaranty Trust, manufacturers Hanover, and European banks like Barclays and Credit Lyonnais, all of which were leading members or close associates of the Anglo-American establishment, a monopolistic group whose declared aim was world domination. There you go. It's all tying in very nicely. On their part, communist regimes such as that of Soviet Russia sought the collaboration of monopolistic capitalists from inception, allowing National City Bank to retain a presence in Russia and establishing banks in Western Europe's financial centres, e.g. the Moscow Narodny Bank of London and Banque Commerciale pour l'Europe du Nord in Paris, in order to facilitate access to Western capital, and these were followed by similar institutions in Frankfurt, Vienna, Zurich, and Luxembourg. Other key instruments of communist-capitalist collaboration were organizations like the USSR State Committee for Science and Technology, which was responsible for maintaining relations with capitalist countries for the purpose of introducing and financing new technologies into the Soviet economy, and the USSR Trade and Economic Council, whose members included top execs of above-named US banks. This network of East-West organizations ensured close cooperation between the highest ranks of Soviet communism and those of international finance, and secured generous technical and financial assistance to the Soviet and other communist regimes into the late 1980s. That is, until their final collapse, when their debt to Western banks amounted to many billions of dollars. Yeah, that's what happens when you allow your government to get you into debt. Collapse. Sooner or later, collapse. Because the banks are too big to fail. The banks have got it all locked down. And it's the money. Follow the money. Where does the money come from? Who makes the money? And who controls the organizations that make the money? Because they're really... like the discussion of capitalism and communism and which system's good and which system's bad is kind of meaningless unless you're talking about, well, what kind of money are you using in that system and where does the money come from? Is it a Rothschild-controlled central bank which loans money out at interest and creates money out of thin air when people take on a loan? Or, is it something else? Is it a different system with a different kind of currency that functions in a different sort of way and cannot be manipulated through and brought into a hyperinflationary scenario during which real-world assets are seized, stolen, plundered, and pilfered? And that was the plan all along, because that's what this system was, what the system is designed to do over the long term. And that's how the banking elites, who were not really elites, they're more just like parasites, scumbag psychopaths, but that's how they build and maintain wealth intergenerationally and get access to the big club that you and I are not in. Alan Watt often says that the way you get into that club is by building and maintaining massive amounts of wealth and holding on to it for a few generations, which makes perfect sense to me. Like, what other test could there be, right, than that? So I think that is absolutely on point. It makes so much sense. And you can talk capitalism versus communism versus socialism versus shared ownership versus private property, individual rights. You can talk that stuff all day long, but if you're not talking about the currency and the money and where does it come from and what are people using as a means of exchange, then you're missing the most important, relevant part of the conversation, in my opinion. Celine Lyon says, bring back barter and cut out government tax theft. Amen to that. That is such a good point that I'm going to take a swig. I just said swib. I've obviously been having too many sips. Maybe we'll use swib. It's a new thing. It's halfway. It's more than a sip, but it's not quite a swig. It's a swib. So there you are. We're inventing new words. That's another thing we do on this channel. Because why not? All right. So let's carry on. In his expose of Soviet capitalist collaboration, Anthony Sutton wrote that financiers like the Morgans and the Rockefellers were without ideology and that they were simply power-motivated. However, being power-motivated does not automatically exclude ideological motivation. J.P. Morgan's personal political views are more difficult to document, but while the Morgans were widely regarded as Republicans, that is, conservatives, it is indisputable that they initiated or supported a number of projects that can only be described as left-wing. At any rate, the matter is fairly clear in the case of Andrew Carnegie and the Rockefellers. As evidence from writings like Problems of Today, Wealth, Labor, Socialism, Carnegie was a supporter of socialist causes, even winning the approval of Fabian socialist masterminds like Bernard Shaw. As for the Rockefellers, their political stand must be beyond dispute. Standard Oil director John Davison Rockefeller Jr. graduated from Brown University, Rhode Island in 1897 after taking various social sciences courses, including a study of Karl Marx's Das Kapital, required reading among early Fabian socialists. As a committed internationalist, he also financed Fabian and other left-wing projects like the London School of Economics, the Lincoln School, the League of Nations, and the communist-influenced Institute of Pacific Relations. As Sutton himself notes, J.D. Rockefeller Jr.'s eldest son, J.D. Rockefeller III, was involved with the CFR and the IPR and authored the Second American Revolution, in which he advocated collectivism under the guise of cautious conservatism and the public good. This is not in the least surprising. JDR III's brothers Nelson, Winthrop, Lawrence, and David all attended the Fabian Socialist Lincoln School of New York, which was founded by their father. Predictably enough, Nelson took to quoting from a copy of Das Kapital, which he carried around, while David wrote a senior thesis on Fabian socialism at Harvard in 1936, studied at the Fabian LSE, and, like his brother Nelson, acquired a reputation for backing left-wing projects. David Rockefeller, therefore, may be safely identified as one of America's chief Fabian socialists. Like Marx, Lenin, and Stalin, these luxury-loving financiers have kept socialism out of their own private life while recommending it for the rest of the world. In 1973, David Rockefeller founded the Trilateral Commission, an international relations organization, with his friend Zbigniew Brzezinski as director. Zbig, who later became U.S. National Security Advisor, was the author of Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era, in which he described Marxism as a vital creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision, and as a mechanism of human progress. Rockefeller himself, after a visit to China in the same year, praised the Chinese Revolution for producing more efficient and dedicated administration, as well as fostering high morale and community purpose. High morale. I mean, that's the kind of high morale that you see on videos of like North Koreans, where if you don't smile enough or if you don't clap long enough, then you get a visit. You get kidnapped during the night. No one ever knows what happened to you or where you disappeared to, right? That's why the morale's high. It's like enforced high morale. All right, continuing. The question that will arise in the reader's mind at this point is, if the Rockefellers are revolutionary Fabian socialists, why do they pretend to be Republicans, i.e., in US terms, center-right or conservative? The answer, as candidly put by Nelson Rockefeller himself, is that the Republican guise allows them to pursue liberal democratic, i.e. center-left programs without arousing the suspicion of center-right business, the traditional supporter of Republican policies. This tactic is, of course, wholly in line with established Fabian socialist practice and enables the money power to pull the strings from both sides of the political spectrum. Needless to say, this duplicity is facilitated by the money power's global empire of endowments and foundations, which, due to their philanthropic status, provide a false appearance of impartiality. On closer investigation, of course, they prove to be funding only such projects that are of tactical and strategic value to their Fabian socialist agenda. Given their tactics and aims, it may not be inappropriate, paraphrasing Proudhon, to describe the Rockefellers as the tapeworms of American republicanism and more generally of liberal capitalism. Nor are the Rockefellers the only financial group with socialist connections. Lazard appointed Lord Mandelson, a leading Fabian socialist, senior advisor, and the Rothschilds are similarly involved with socialist ideologists from Jacques Attali and Emmanuel Macron to Gerhard Schroeder. Well. He's really getting in. It took him 200 pages, but he's really getting into his stride now, his old Mr. Ratiu. Over on Rumble, we've got Heidi saying, usury is evil no matter what name they use for it. I agree 100%. And Heidi says, elite, scumbag, psychopaths, nothing elite about them at all. I know, I agree. And I hate it when I use that word because I know there's nothing elite about them, but it's out there, isn't it? People know what I mean. I think people know what I mean. I hope you do. I don't think they're elite. I think they're parasitic cowards. Scumbag, parasitic, and cowards, and unimaginative and unable to feel love, compassion, empathy, warmth, generosity, kindness, decency. And they want to destroy all that because they can't have it. And if I can't have it, I must destroy it. And there's nothing elite about them. They're just scumbags. Celine Lyon says, oh, I read that bit away. Swib away, Nick. Thank you. And then Frank says, what if Nick takes a Schwab? Yeah, unfortunately, I did have one or two Schwabs during the Big C event, and I will not be doing any more of that. I had to do them for my job at the time. That was my excuse. But that was before I realized that I could just wipe it under the toilet seat or run it under the tap water or dip it in Coca-Cola or ketchup and send that off to the lab, and it would come back negative, which is what I started doing very soon after I realized that those Schwabs were a lot of bullshit. And I could probably reveal that now because I don't work for that company anymore. So, thankfully. All right. Continuing. The UN and internationalist capitalism. In addition to the ideological links between socialist internationalism and internationalist capitalism, we can establish material links between the two groups. The UN headquarters was established in the United States at the insistence of the Soviet Union, apparently to facilitate communist propaganda and espionage in the US. Yeah, and just to mention, Griffin covers really well in his book, which is all about, he covers the fact that what Ratiu just says, yes, the Soviets wanted the headquarters of the UN to be in America on the East Coast. Was it the East Coast? I think it was the East Coast. And everyone going in and out of it had diplomatic immunity and were free to, didn't have to have their baggage checked or go through any security checks. So it was just a perfect way in to and out of the US for Soviet sympathizers, for moles, for double agents, for triple agents. They just built it. And the land it was built on was donated by the Rockefellers. And prior to them building the UN headquarters on it, it was an abattoir. And it was one of the largest abattoirs either in America or in that part of America. I forget which. But it was just basically the place of death, murder, destruction, fear, pain, suffering, and all that stuff. UN was built on top of that land. So imagine the juju and the energy in and around that area. And I don't think it was any accident that happened that way. But anyway, continuing. However, New York City, where the UN headquarters is located, is America's financial capital, in addition to being the historical center of American socialism. Therefore, it is legitimate to suspect a possible link between the UN and New York's financial world. This suspicion is reinforced by the fact that the land on which the UN headquarters was built was purchased and donated to the UN in 1946 by David Rockefeller's father, John D. Rockefeller, Jr. There you are. Further investigation reveals that the Rockefeller-dominated Council on Foreign Relations played a key role in the creation of the UN. As related earlier, the original CFR was a Milner-Fabian outfit created in 1919 as a sister organisation of the London Royal Institute of International Affairs, aka Chatham House. It was relaunched in 1921 in collaboration with New York-based international banking interests, and its proceedings were dominated by New York businessmen, bankers, and lawyers. In particular, J.P. Morgan & Co., partners, associates, and employees were officers and directors of the CFR. Right, okay, I read that a bit weird. Let me do that again. In particular, J.P. Morgan & Co., partners, associates, and employees were officers and directors of the CFR. Among other prominent bankers and financiers involved with the CFR were the Rockefellers. The CFR headquarters was acquired with Rockefeller funds. The CFR, therefore, was basically a Morgan Rockefeller organization. As its name suggests, the CFR was concerned with international relations and aimed to direct American intercourse with foreign nations. To what extent CFR actually directed U.S. foreign relations becomes evident from the fact that President Roosevelt was a virtual mouthpiece for CFR interests, and that the State Department was dominated by CFR members. However, even though these interests controlled the President and the State Department, a superficial appearance of democratic procedures had to be maintained. For this purpose, various instruments were set up through which the UN was created. These were the War and Peace Studies Program, the Informal Agenda Group, the Advisory Committee on Post-War Policy, and particularly the Special Subcommittee on International Organization, a subcommittee of the former. The WPS was headed by the editor of the CFR magazine, Foreign Affairs, Hamilton Fish Armstrong. Secretary of State Counsel Hull was chairman of the IAG and the Advisory Committee, and Under-Secretary of State Sumner Wells, a relative of the Astors, was vice chairman of the Advisory Committee and chairman of the Special Subcommittee. As all were CFR members and their groups provided information and advice to the US President and the State Department, who then acted on that information and advice, it is obvious that the democratic appearance was a very thin veneer indeed. This clearly debunks the myth of America's political system as democratic. To be sure, America, like Britain, has great democratic potential. In practice, however, as in Britain, while the electorate may vote for a particular leader, what the electorate does not know is that the elected leader, irrespective of political persuasion, will invariably do the bidding of the financial interests, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. This chapter is he's absolutely killing it in this chapter. And great point, Heidi, who says it's not the powers that be, it's the cowards that be. Yeah, I like that too. Hasdak asks if I took part in the injections. I did not. No, I definitely. I spent a lot of time reading around that. I had a lot of downtime actually at that job when people were asleep or out. I used to do sleep-ins, and I would stay sometimes 2 nights in a row. And then when everyone had gone home and the residents had all settled in their flats, I could just read, listen to podcasts and interviews. So I would probably do like between 6 to 9 hours of reading and research a day. And then I would I would have headphones in and I would listen when I was on my bike ride to and from work. So I was getting a lot of information at that time, and I was really obsessed about it, trying to just catch up with what I've been missing and find good sources of information. And so, luckily and very thankfully, and I'm very grateful that I didn't come anywhere near to taking those injections, which is, I'm glad. ESP says, if they hadn't stolen all the alien tech, they might have found genuine love and not bought it. I like it. Frank says, page 203 is another great one. Yeah, it is indeed. Celine Lyon, they create words to make themselves look good, e.g. philanthropist. Yeah, that's a good point. Be interesting to know the etymology of that word, wouldn't it? Now you got me curious. I wonder if I can look up quickly on Etym Online. Okay. I should really share my screen with you, shouldn't I? I'm not going to be able to share it without moving everything around. Here we go. Okay, bear with me. Put a page marker. So what was it? It was philanthropist, wasn't it? Okay, so we've got philanthrope, philanthropic, philanthropist. So we'll start with philanthrope. 1734, loving mankind and humane. It's from a Greek word, so it's pretty old. It's been around for quite a while. Yeah, because phi, like philosophy, philanthropy, does mean love, doesn't it? Philosophy means love of knowledge. Philanthropy. Yeah, so I don't think they invented the word. Oh, I don't know. Maybe they invented it in the 1700s. Maybe that's how far philanthropy goes back. It could be, couldn't it? I think it'd be very interesting to get a good history of philanthropy, but I think it's going to go back to kings and queens and emperors and all that, where they had to do things for the people that they were ruling, and I'm sure some of them were genuine and some of them were not. I don't think this idea of although we've got the example of Rockefeller reinventing himself as a philanthropist, which is the same thing that Bill Gates has done, and that whole rebooting of one's image is a fairly new thing, because you've got, well, it's probably not a new thing. There's probably nothing new under the sun, is there? Let's be real. Nothing new under the sun. That's a tactic that we kind of told. Edward Bernays came up with this idea, and Ivy Lee, I think, was the Rockefeller's publicist, and advised him to go and hand out pennies and get pictures of him giving out, not pennies, it had been quarters, I suppose, wouldn't it? I think that was Ivy Lee. So it's not going to be a new thing. It's going to be the same Machiavellian tactics that go way, way, way back. It's just that the the ruling class of cowardly parasites relabel themselves, and they give themselves a different title, and they give the systems that they operate in a different title and a different label. And it's really just a process of marketing and rebranding, because all the way through history, it's the same pyramid structure with a minority at the top and everyone else scrapping around below. Although in the last 100 years, we've enjoyed a decent bit of material comfort trickle down that pyramid to those below. But I think we're kind of on the cusp of that running out and on the edge of transitioning and into the next system, which I think is going to have, you'll own nothing and be happy type vibes, as the World Economic Forum has said. And so I think we might be right at the very end of enjoying this little brief respite of material comfort that we've seen over the last build up over the last 100 years or so. But who knows? Only the people with the plans and the schemes and the agendas know. But that's why we read these books, so we might have an idea too. So yes, 203, another good page. Maybe I'll stick another sticky on it. All right, I'll put it about there. Where did I get to? I'm not even sure. Went off on a tangent. Now I'm lost. Did we do this bit? No. At any rate, Wells's special subcommittee created the blueprint for the UN and played an important role during the 1944 Dumbarton Oaks Conference in collaboration with the IAG. Over 40 CFR members who were members of the above groups were delegates to the 1945 San Francisco Conference, where the UN Charter was written. So it's all linking in very nicely now, isn't it? Let's just reread that bit. 40 CFR members were delegates to the 1945 San Francisco Conference, where the UN Charter was written. So you had 40 CFR members at that conference during the drafting of the Charter. They included Armstrong, director of Johns Hopkins University, and CFR Vice President Isaiah Bowman, President of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, James T. Shotwell, Secretary of State Edward R. Stettinius, CFR co-founder and future Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, future Governor of New York and U.S. Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, future President of the World Bank John J. Jack McCloy, Secretary General of the UN Conference and Director of the U.S. Office of Special Political Affairs Alger Hiss, etc. The CFR groups involved in the creation of the UN were particularly close to other influential organizations and institutions, such as banks and foundations, which served as sources of financial support for their internationalist projects. Notable examples are the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and leading banks like Chase National and National City, which were controlled by interlocking interests. The CEIP's president was Alger Hiss, who was exposed as a Soviet agent, followed by J.T. Shotwell, while John Foster Dulles was its chairman. David Rockefeller himself joined the endowment in 1945, ostensibly thanks to his longtime friend Dulles, but officially at the invitation of Hiss. And the reference for that is Rockefeller's memoirs. In 1945, he joined the CFR Board of Directors. In 1969, he became chairman and chief exec of Chase Manhattan Bank. In 1970, he was elected CFR chairman and subsequently head of the nominating committee for membership. What becomes evident is that the same persons who controlled international banking and endowments were also controlling the CFR and US foreign policy. David Rockefeller has admitted that the CFR, quote, continues to influence the formulation of American foreign policy to this day. And that's also in his memoirs. Rockefeller believed that a new international architecture had to be created and was determined to play a role in this through the CFR, which he thought the best place to pursue that line. In addition to his influence in the CFR, Rockefeller was also on friendly terms with UN officials like Secretary General Kurt Waldheim and, of course, Henry Kissinger. Kissinger was Director of Foreign Policy Study at CFR and worked for the Rockefeller brothers since the mid-1950s. He was also advisor to J.F. Kennedy and other U.S. presidents, being particularly influential in an official capacity as Secretary of State. Significantly, Kissinger has been identified as a Soviet collaborator by American and French sources. The Rockefellers also had ample means of influencing U.S. and world affairs through numerous projects funded by organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation, through organizations like the Communist-controlled Institute of Pacific Relations and the Trilateral Commission, through donations to political parties, and through direct business negotiations between the Rockefellers and international leaders, particularly in the communist bloc, such as Nikita Khrushchev of Soviet Russia and Zhou Enlai of Maoist China. In sum, while the UN was run by socialist politicians, the money interests behind it carried on doing business as usual, including with socialist dictatorships like Russia and China, enabling them to survive and thrive at the expense of democracy and freedom. The UN, a world government in the making. The influence of business on world affairs has little to do with conspiracy theory and a lot to do with the facts on the ground. Nations establish relations with each other in order to foster international trade. Business interests have always played a major role in international relations. As Henry Kissinger put it, if you don't understand the close links between the economy and politics, you cannot really be a true statesman. Unfortunately, those who profit most from international business are the established business groups behind multinational corporations. The economic power wielded by these groups enables them to influence and even dominate politics. When monopolistic business interests ally themselves with political interests, they can virtually rule a nation, a group of nations, or the whole world. As long as the nation or nations in question are part of an economic system dominated or controlled by those interests. So it's about the system. This is what I was saying in either the last stream or a recent one, that it's not about now. When this all started with Cecil Rhodes and Lord Milner, they wanted to spread British dominion throughout the world and have the whole world under the control of the British, the crown, let's say. But what that's now become and sort of evolved and morphed into is just the system, right? So you know when you're in a global one world system, if you go to another place and the system is familiar and it works, right? You go to another place and you put your card in the bank machine and you get money out. I did that, and I used the example that happened to me. I went to South Korea, I went to Vietnam, I put my UK bank card in the machine and it spits money out and gives it to me. That tells me that it's the same system there as it is here, right? Even though there's a different branding, there's a different marketing, there's a different label on it, but it's the same system, right? You go to South Korea and Vietnam, for example, and they drink massive amounts of alcohol. They're really into their alcohol in both those countries. Not any other substances. In fact, South Korea has really, really high penalties if you go off the beaten track with regards to your substances and your chemical alterations of the mind and consciousness. Similar in, but cigarettes and alcohol and caffeine, absolutely fine, totally legal, no worries, have as much of that as you want. In fact, it's super cheap and readily available, and everyone's doing it. So it's the same system, right? Cinemas. All those countries had cinemas. All those countries had shopping malls. All those countries have the internet and Wi-Fi points and fast food, right? They have their own versions of those things with a different kind of label. It might not be McDonald's. It might be Lotteria, But my point is it's the same system. People wear shirts and suits and ties, trousers to go to work. It's the same system. People work Monday to Friday in an office at a laptop. It's the same system, right? So that's what we're living through. That's what's going on. That's what's happening is that the systems are being, if you're in control of the system and you design the system, which I think they have, and they are in control of it. That's the giveaway. That's when you see things homogenizing and becoming the same everywhere you go, right? So little sidebar there for you. Let's get back to the book. Yeah. So it's the economic system dominated or controlled by those interests. As the world is increasingly integrated into a single economic system, which, as we have just seen, is dominated by certain business interests, it is coming close to a situation of domination by and subservience to those interests. Yeah. And so when the Big C event was rolled out, and every single country pretty much on the face of the planet went along with it, announced it, terrorized their populations, locked them down, forced them to wear face nappies, forced them, coerced them, bullied them into accepting experimental injections. That tells you it's one system everywhere, pretty much close to completion. It's like it's there. They just haven't announced that it's there yet. But you can see that it's there if you travel. If you travel around, and you might not be able to travel around for very long. Anyway, the UN, in particular, has been in receipt of substantial Rockefeller funding, as was its predecessor, the League of Nations, and, like the latter, is becoming more and more an instrument through which the monopolistic business interests behind it are placing themselves in a position where they can virtually rule the world. Indeed, the structure of the UN system is sufficiently similar to that of nation-states for it to be regarded as a world state. To begin with, like any state, the UN system performs specific legislative, executive, and judicial functions. The General Assembly. The UN General Assembly, and this is quite a good acronym there, UNGA, is the legislative branch of the UN. It was established by the UN Charter in 1945. It has the power to appoint the UN President, the Secretary General, and members of other UN branches like the Security Council and ECOSOC. It also oversees the UN budget, receives reports, and makes recommendations in the form of resolutions. As we saw earlier, the first UN President was the Belgian socialist Paul-Henri Spaak, and the first Secretary General, the Norwegian socialist Trygve Lie, and that's according to the official website, un.org. The Security Council. The UN Security Council is another key organ of the UN, which operates in close cooperation with the General Assembly. It was created for the purpose of peacekeeping and authorizing international sanctions. It has its own president, a position first occupied by the socialist Norman J.O. Makin, a leading member of the Australian Labour Party. The Secretariat. The UN Secretariat is the executive branch of the UN. It carries out tasks on the orders of the above UN bodies and provides information and facilities for their meetings. It is headed by the UN Secretary General, who is assisted by an Under-Secretary General. The first UN Under-Secretary General in the Secretariat's Department of Political Affairs was the Soviet Communist Arkady Sobolev. The World Court. The International Court of Justice, or World Court, is a judicial branch of the UN. It was established in 1945 by the UN Charter to settle international legal disputes and as a replacement for the League of Nations Permanent Court of International Justice. The court consists of 15 judges who are elected for 9 years by the General Assembly and the Security Council. From inception, most of its judges were known communists and other left-wingers, like the Russian Sergei Borisovich Krylov, who had also been involved in writing the UN Charter. On the US side, we may mention Philip Jessup, chairman of the communist-controlled Institute of Pacific Relations, and close associate of Alger Hiss and other known communists. Jessup was involved in the 1943 United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration Conference, the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference, the 1945 San Francisco Conference, and the drafting of the World Court Statute. The Economic and Social Council. The UN Economic and Social Council coordinates the economic, social, and related work of the various UN agencies and commissions, and consults in its work with academics and business representatives. Its first president was the Indian Ramaswamy Mudaliar, former General Secretary of the left-wing Indian Justice Party. The second ECOSOC president was the left-wing Yugoslav Andrija Stampar, a member of several international expert committees funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. Among the organizations operating through ECOSOC's coordinating machinery are the following specialized agencies. The International Labour Organization. The International Labour Organization was created as an agency of the League of Nations by the 1919 Treaty of Versailles and became a special agency of the UN in 1946. It deals with employment and social security issues and is run by a governing body headed by a Director General. From inception, ILO was a British Fabian-instigated outfit which was set up with the assistance of Professor James T. Shotwell, a member of the Executive Committee of President Woodrow Wilson's Inquiry Group, and was linked with leading Fabians like William Stephen Sanders and Philip Noel Baker. The Fabian Frank Wallace Galton was Secretary General of its Secretariat, aka International Labour Office, and it has had a string of socialists and Fabian collaborators as Directors General. The French socialist Albert Thomas, the Briton Harold Butler, the American John G. Winant, the Irishman Edward Fellon, the American David A. Morse, etc. The World Bank. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or World Bank, was established at the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference by the USA, Britain, and Russia, the former two being the principal movers behind the project as well as the bank's largest shareholders. As noted by Catherine Gwynne, the World Bank is dominated by the United States, which sees the bank as an instrument of foreign policy, quote, to be used in support of specific U.S. aims and objectives. Similarly, Mark Curtis, who describes the World Bank as, quote, an instrument of control, states that U.S. and British planners have, quote, always regarded the World Bank as a vehicle for exerting influence over the international economy and as an instrument of their foreign policies. This is, of course, true, but the picture only becomes complete if and when we have understood who the US and British planners were and whose specific aims and objectives the bank is serving. One of the key architects of the World Bank was Harry Dexter White of the CFR-dominated US Treasury Department, who had close links to the Rockefeller-associated Institute of Pacific Relations. Among World Bank presidents, who are traditionally U.S. nationals appointed by the U.S. president on the advice of members of the international money power, have been Eugene Meyer, former chairman of Federal Reserve, Eugene R. Black Senior, Vice President of Chase National Bank, whose father served as Fed chairman, Robert McNamara of Ford Motor Company, Louis T. Preston of J.P. Morgan, and James Wolfensohn of J. Rothschild, Wolfensohn and Co. All were also CFR directors or had close links to CFR interests. Following the creation of the World Bank, the CFR-dominated U.S. State Department noted the important diplomatic weapon of loans. That's a quote from the Curtis book. Indeed, as the World Bank, and I'll just remind people as well that this author, Curtis, who he is referencing, is a Royal Institute for International Affairs Research Fellow. And it is that book there over my shoulder, Secret Affairs, by Mark Curtis. Indeed, as the World Bank provides loans to governments, for example, its first loans beginning in 1947 were to European countries for post-war reconstruction, its influence on world affairs has been considerable. World Bank President John J. McCloy of the New York law firm Milbank, Tweed, Hadley and McCloy, a Rockefeller representative, became High Commissioner for occupied Germany and was responsible for the creation of the German state after the war. McCloy also became chairman of Chase and CFR, as well as advisor to a string of U.S. presidents. As pointed out by the economist P.T. Bauer, foreign aid increases the power of recipient governments vis-à-vis the general population and makes them dependent on the foreign donors. The vast amounts of money at its disposal mean that the World Bank remains one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. In 2011, its loan portfolio reached $258 billion. As all the above-named World Bank presidents were also CFR members, the influence of the CFR and the Rockefeller-associated business interests behind it is indisputable. As for the British planner's influence on the bank, it is evident from the involvement of the chief Fabian economist J.M. Keynes, which is John Maynard Keynes, in its formation, as well as in the large number of LSE graduates among its staff. Yeah, that's really... It's really interlocking, overlapping. This is really powerful stuff. This is like puzzle pieces that all fit together to give you the picture, isn't it? World Bank projects involving large-scale agricultural development, timber management, and road and dam construction from India to the Philippines and from Africa to Brazil have resulted in the displacement of millions of citizens, as have its privatization programs in Central and Eastern Europe, Russia, and elsewhere, while enabling the banking and financial institutions behind it to take over entire economic sectors across the globe. And Ratiu tells us that he's going to talk more about that in chapter 10. The International Monetary Fund. Another key organization associated with the UN is the International Monetary Fund. The IMF was also created at Bretton Woods in 1944. Ostensibly to promote international trade and economic cooperation. The interests behind IMF are the same as those behind the World Bank, as evidenced by the involvement of Harry Dexter White, who was responsible for the groundwork for the creation of both the World Bank and the IMF under CFR directions. White and his collaborators belonged to the Economic and Financial Group, one of several groups of trusted experts from Rockefeller-funded universities hired by the CFR to advise the US government on post-war planning. In addition, as already noted, White had strong connections with the Institute of Pacific Relations, which in turn was strongly influenced by Morgan Rockefeller interests and funded by the same interests which funded the CFR. The chief figure in the IPR for many years was Boston banker Jerome D. Green, a Milner Group member and close associate of Morgan Rockefeller interests. On his part, White's British collaborator and co-architect of the Bretton Woods system, Keynes, longtime Secretary-General of the Fabian Royal Economic Society, has been the head of the Treasury Division in charge of external finance during World War I, and later became a director of the Bank of England, and was therefore a trusted collaborator or agent of vested financial interests associated with the above. And just to another little sidebar on that topic of John Maynard Keynes being the director of the Bank of England, the preamble ramble to Tuesday's broadcast included a little look into a character called Mark Carney, who is an ex-Bank of England director, as well as Bank of Canada director, and who is now the president of the Royal Institute for International Affairs. So I don't know if he's a member of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, but the CFR is the American equivalent of the Royal Institute for International Affairs. So the fact that he's the president of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, he's a Bilderberg attendee, and he is the ex-director of the Bank of England, right? Just to sort of bring it up to the present day and show you how these things work and how these people sort of join the financial institutions, the think tanks, the policy institutes, and the governments, and they become advisors and they run the economic system that the whole world is being connected or plugged into, let's say. And anyone who has risen up to challenge this economic system to, let's say, create their own currency, maybe one that isn't prone to usury, to lending at interest, There's another phrase as well that describes the currency, isn't there? Like fractional reserve lending, fractional reserve banking, or fractional reserve lending, something like that. If people stand up and say, we're going to set up our own currency, then they tend to get whacked. That's happened a few times in various countries. So that's what it's all about. It's about designing and controlling the economic system and plugging everybody into it. And you can let people go on with their illusions of nations, sovereign nations, their illusions of political parties, of even wars, of competing economic systems. That's all illusion. That's all illusionary. That's shadows on the cave wall for me and you. And the big boys, the big players at the top of the pyramid and behind the scenes. I don't know how you can be both on top of the pyramid and behind the scenes at the same time. I'm getting my metaphors mixed up again. I've obviously had too many swibs. But those big boys, they're designing the economic system and they're controlling the economic system. And if you design and run the system, then it doesn't matter what the people within that system. Well, I suppose it does matter. I was going to say it doesn't matter what they believe about it. It does matter. It doesn't matter what you believe, so long as you don't pull back the curtain and see, the wrinkly old coward behind the curtain who's running the show, right? But anything else other than that, aliens and Tartaria and flat Earth, round Earth, hollow Earth, all the major organized religions, all the cults, atheism, all that stuff. They're quite happy for everyone to argue and debate and discuss and fight over that, as long as you keep going to work and paying your taxes and buying the smartphones and staring and giving all your data to the internet and staring at the screens and obeying the rules. They don't care what you believe about all of this stuff, right? Frank's popped in and says Mark Carney had a 2023 net worth of $75.2 billion. How can someone in such poverty survive? Yeah, I'm a bit worried about him. Only 75.2 billion. Is that it? Oh, poor guy. His children must be really struggling and suffering. Celine Lyon says, is it true that the shareholders of the Bank of England are occulted? I don't know if that's true or not. But if you look over this shoulder, those 4 books, it's like purple, red, blue, green. That is a 4-volume set on the history of the Bank of England. No, sorry. It's the history of the City of London, that. So I don't know. I was getting City of London and Bank of England mixed up because it's tired and I've had a few swibs. Because I'm tired and I've had a few swibs. Oh, I can't even speak. Let's go back to the book and finish this chapter before I totally make a dick of myself. Looking ahead, we've got some really juicy topics coming up. And quite a lot of pages left, so I don't know if we're going to get the whole chapter finished tonight. Probably not, actually. But we'll press on for a little longer. As in the case of the World Bank, Anglo-American and, in particular, Eastern establishment control of the IMF is evident from the identity of those who run it. The fund's very first managing director was the Belgian Camille Gut, a close collaborator of the international bankers who controlled Belgium and its colonial interests. He had been a member of a group in charge of Belgian purchases in London during World War I and, in the 1920s, became assistant to the Treasury under Finance Minister Émile Franquet. In this capacity, he was involved in a loan to the Belgian state by an Anglo-American banking syndicate. With Franquet's assistance, he then secured a post with the Société Générale de Belgique, Belgium's Rothschild-associated dominant bank, of which Franquet was a director and later governor. Franquet was also a managing director of Union Minière de Haute-Katanga, which was co-owned by the SGB and the British Tanganyika Concessions, and represented the Anglo-American establishment's mining interest in the Belgian Congo. Ooh, this is quite, I don't know, totally unplanned, nice synchronicity that it's linking us into the Belgian Congo and to Katanga, which is what part one of Ed Griffin's Fearful Master book talks about, the Operation Rum Punch that I talked about at the preamble ramble to tonight's broadcast. So pretty cool. I love it when synchronicities like that happen. Gut himself joined various mining and industrial companies with links to Katanga, as well as Ford Motor Company. During World War II, he became Minister of Finance in the London-based Belgian government in exile, was involved in the creation of the IMF and World Bank, and, on retiring as IMF Managing Director in 1951, became a business associate of Baron Leon Lambert, a Rothschild relative and head of Bank Lambert. Lambert? As the world's largest creditor as well as largest contributor to the fund, America controlled the IMF from inception. This is reflected in the fact that while the fund's managing director was a European, its deputy managing directors were American. In addition, CFR and Trilateral Commission members have held key posts in the IMF. For example, Dennis Healy, chairman of the Interim Committee of the IMF Board of Governors from 1977 to 1979, and more recently, Antonio Borges, director of the IMF European Department. Mihai Tănăsescu, senior advisor and member of the executive board. Shigemitsu Sugisaki, deputy managing director. Anne Kruger, first deputy managing director. John Lipsky, first deputy managing director and acting managing director. And they were all either Trilateral Commission or CFR members. Lipsky has also been vice chairman of JP Morgan and, following the latter's 2000 merger with Chase, worked for the new organization. Significantly, the CFR was created to direct American intercourse with foreign nations. The Trilateral Commission had a similar purpose. As its founder, David Rockefeller, relates, already in the first year of its existence, the Commission published reports on political and monetary relations between America, Europe, and Japan in order to influence the behavior of their governments. The intention of CFR and Trilateral Commission to influence governments is therefore beyond dispute. Moreover, as both organizations and their leading members, McCloy, Lipsky, etc., have been employees of the Morgan Chase banking groups, it's reasonable to infer that they have been representing the interests of the said groups. Indeed, it would be absurd to believe otherwise. In conjunction with the World Bank and other powerful bodies like the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and the U.S. Export-Import Bank, the IMF forms a formidable lobby group for the multinational corporations which established it and whose interests the fund clearly represents. The group is assisted in this role by fifth columns operating in target countries and consisting of local bankers and industrialists, political leaders, and technocrats such as Harvard or LSE educated and IMF trained quote-unquote economists. Indoctrinated with the IMF ideology and employed as advisors to central banks and finance ministries. Countries seeking financial assistance from the IMF are expected to allow the fund to dictate their economic and other policies. Those who do not submit to the fund's conditions will have their credit rating downgraded and can be denied access to international credit, the main sources of which, private lenders, governments, or multilateral institutions like the World Bank, are closely connected to the interests represented by the fund. The latter and associated organizations can also apply pressure on neighboring countries to enforce cooperation or to impose financial and economic isolation on reluctant governments. Like the World Bank, the IMF has been, for most of its history, following Keynesian principles and represents a prime illustration of the close collaboration between international money interests and Fabian socialism. Among the IMF's notable achievements has been the funding of Europe's, and particularly Britain's, socialist governments from the 1940s to the 70s. Being designed with post-war European debt in mind, the IMF has remained an instrument for exerting pressure on European governments and for pushing them in a Fabian socialist direction by imposing Keynesian policies of deficit spending, as evidenced since the 2007 financial crisis. The International Financial Corporation. The International Financial Corporation was established in 1956 at the suggestion of Nelson Rockefeller, who headed President Truman's Advisory Board on International Development, and in collaboration with Eugene R. Black Sr., President, and Robert L. Garner, former Vice President of the World Bank. Its task of financing private sector projects, e.g. lending to private companies, enabled the IFC to play a key role in privatization programs around the world in collaboration with the World Bank, the IMF, and banking consortia. For the most part, such programs have been thinly veiled takeovers of previously state-owned assets, from natural resources to industry and banks, by the Anglo-American establishment, with disastrous consequences to the economies in question. The World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization was established in 1995 to supervise and control international trade. It replaced the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, created at the 1947 UN Conference on Trade and Employment, whose co-founder and first Director General was LSE lecturer Eric Wyndham White. Out of WTO's 6 Directors General to date, 3 have been known socialists: Renato Ruggiero of the Italian Socialist Party, Mike Moore of the New Zealand Labour Party, and Pascal Lamy of the French Socialist Party. In addition, Lamy's predecessor, Supachai Panichpakdi of Thailand, was a disciple of Dutch economist Jan Tinbergen, who preached a synthesis of capitalism and socialism of the kind favoured by international financiers like those behind the UN. I just wanted to mention as well that this General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, is one that Alan Watt mentions quite a bit. And I don't know a lot about it, but from what I've heard of Alan Watt's talks on cuttingthroughthematrix.com, the GATT treaty, or the agreement at least, is what's responsible for China being the main producer of everything, and the offshoring and the exporting of all that industry and all that production, right? So 1947, which is when the GATT was created, and then from 1947 onwards is when you see the corporations offshoring their production, and then you start to see the increase, the ramping up of everything being made in China, and the desolation of the domestic ability to produce, and transformation of domestic economies. I'm saying domestic now, meaning like UK and US. The transformation of the domestic economies into these kind of service-based economies where we're not really producing anything. And so we're now, at this point, plugged into the international world, so dependent on all these international trade routes and deals and the import-export system, that we can't sustain ourselves just on our domestic industry alone. So that, again, that's that example of creating the system, running the system, designing the system, and being in charge of it. And then it doesn't really matter what isms people are arguing about in university, or students with their parents, what isms they're discussing, or what political party gets voted in or voted out, because the system has already been designed, planned, agreed upon elsewhere, and the movement towards the completion of that system continues regardless of what people, what they do with their vote, and what they do with their money as well, because whatever you spend your money on, unless you're very, very conscientious about supporting local businesses, putting that money into the hands of small businesses that are family run and family owned, then for the most part, your money's probably going to find its way to, the sort of interests that support the Keynesian model, that support the smooshing together of the capitalism, the synthesis of the capitalism and socialist system, the big financiers that run the UN scam, we should say. We've got R. Murray1 over on Rumble. Good to see you. ESP says, would clean free energy affect the monetary system? I dare say it would. I think that's a really good question. If you've, I don't know if people get whacked for trying to work on the clean energy situation. I have a feeling that there's probably a lot of technology that is hidden, that is, that when people create it and come up with it, they get bullied, intimidated, harassed, right? There's no reason for it. Like, our technology is just stalled. Apart from the data collection by way of the internet, there hasn't been that many real technological advances. It's all to do with the way we are monitored, tracked, trailed, surveilled, traced, and databased. That seems to be the main area of technology. And then you've got, I suppose, like genetics, GMO organisms, and then your Rockefeller-funded allopathic medicine. That's probably had some developments. But for the most part, nothing's really come along that's been a real game-changing breakthrough for quite a while. So I dare say clean free energy made available to the masses of people would probably affect the monetary system, but I don't know how exactly. A lot of people spend money on energy, right? Because you're forced to. And so it's a big worry for people. And if that money wasn't going on energy, then you'd have more money to invest in healthy food and local businesses, maybe start your own business. Who knows what you could be doing with that money? Things that are useful that you would want to do instead of things that you are forced to do. All right, let's continue with UNESCO. How are we doing for time? Oh, not so bad. All right, UNESCO. The UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization is the cultural agency of the UN. It succeeded the Milner-Fabian League of Nations International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation and was created in 1945 to promote international collaboration through education, science and culture. Its first Director General was the British Fabian socialist Julian Huxley, a friend of leading Milnerites and World Federalists Lionel Curtis and David Astor. Also associated with the UN are the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Health Organization, and the United Nations Children's Fund, all of which have similar histories, compositions, and aims to those of the organizations already discussed. It becomes evident from the above that from the start, the UN has been a left-wing organization with leaders ranging from outright communists and Fabian socialists to pro-socialist Democrats and Rockefeller Republicans representing international business interests. It should be noted in this connection that the US Republican Party has its roots in the Whig movement, which was by definition left-wing, and only came to be seen as center-right or conservative because the whole political system shifted to the left, especially with the appearance of socialists and communists. All right. The UN and NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was a creation of US President F.D. Roosevelt in collaboration with Britain's Fabian Socialist Prime Minister Clement Attlee, whose main objective, as admitted by Labour Defence Secretary Dennis Healey, was, quote, the conversion of the United Nations into some form of world government. In 1948, Attlee's Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin, former chairman of the Fabian Society for Socialist Information and Propaganda, engineered the Treaty of Brussels, which established the Western Union Defence Organisation, a military alliance between Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, which obliged its members to cooperate with the United Nations Security Council. In 1949, WUDO was expanded to include the US, Canada, Portugal, Italy, Norway, Denmark and Iceland, giving birth to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. A number of NATO Secretaries General have been socialists, notably Paul Henry Spaak, William Claes, and Javier Solana. NATO's first Secretary General was Lord Ismay, who infamously declared that its aim was, quote, to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. A preposterous claim, given that after World War II, Germany had no military or anything else for nuclear-armed NATO to keep down, unless he's just talking about keeping down the German people. The shocking truth was that in 1949, Germany was under Allied socialist occupation, namely by Communist Russia under Stalin, Britain under Socialist PM Clement Attlee, France under Socialist President Vincent Auriol, and the US under Democratic and pro-socialist President Harry Truman. Wow, that's an interesting perspective that I've never seen articulated before. Germany was under Allied socialist occupation. In fact, far from the Russians being kept out, half of Germany was under Russian occupation, and most of Central and Eastern Europe, including Poland and Ukraine, was under Russian-controlled communist puppet regimes, as agreed by the Big Three in 1944 to 1945. NATO's true agenda was revealed by Britain's new socialist bosses. Richard Crossman, leading member of the Fabian Society and Labour Party executives, stated, "We are members of the Atlantic Alliance, but this does not mean that we are enemies of every communist revolution." Moreover, Crossman explained, communist movements were often the most effective way of introducing socialism. Similarly, leading Fabian and Labour Defence Secretary Dennis Healey urged international cooperation, particularly with Communist Russia and China. As with other UN-linked bodies, the main mover behind NATO, apart from socialist politicians, was a certain elite group of pro-socialist international financiers. In 1973, US Secretary of State and Rockefeller frontman Henry Kissinger was openly pushing for, quote, dialogue with Communist Russia. By 1975, NATO had been transformed from an alleged shield against communism into an instrument of communist collaboration. As implicitly stated by CFR member and US ambassador to NATO Robert Hunter, NATO was doing the bidding of the CFR. That's a reference to a Wall Street Journal article. Just gonna see how many pages we've got. Figure out where. Oh, still got quite a bit left. Ooh, okay, so we've got about 15 pages left. So I don't think we're going to get to the end of the chapter tonight. Let's see, though. You never know. Things could happen. Heidi over on Rumble says, IMF is truly horrific when one looks into agricultural manipulation. The mangroves and shrimp farming were particularly sickening in my past rabbit hole horror trips. Lord have mercy. Yeah, the IMF is, they're not up to any good, that's for sure. I appreciate that comment, Heidi. I should move this little window over here, then I don't have to hide behind my microphone to read it. That might be better, eh? Okay, continuing. The Institute of International Education. Another key component of the international money powers system of global control is the Institute of International Education. The IIE was established in 1919 in New York at the instigation of Elihu Root and Stephen P. Duggan of City College. Professor Duggan, who was a founding member of the CFR, a supporter of the League of Nations and an advocate of international student exchange, was the Institute's first director. In addition, the IIE has been funded by Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Ford interests. As pointed out by Smoot, the IIE is, quote, wholly a CFR operation, its officials being members of the CFR. Unsurprisingly, the IIE aims to increase the capacity of people to think and work on a global and intercultural basis, and has been working to extend the money power's global reach through higher education activities, lectureships, scholarships, and related projects around the world. Its closeness to Rockefeller UN interests is indicated by the location of its New York headquarters at United Nations Plaza and use of Chase Bank accounts. Controlling religion. In addition to finance, trade, politics, culture, and education, the international money power is able to influence, manipulate, and control religion for subversive purposes through an extensive network of organizations operating both nationally and globally. This has been facilitated by the fact that many religious organizations were already headquartered in New York, one of the money power's main bases. This network currently comprises dozens of organizations which interlock or are otherwise connected with hundreds of others. While it would be outside the scope of the present study to investigate or even list them all, we may briefly note some representative examples. A more comprehensive list of such organizations may be obtained from the works of Dan Smoot, Anthony Sutton, and other researchers. Among these, religious organizations are particularly important, as this type of organization is not commonly regarded as connected with politics. The general public is particularly susceptible to their propaganda, indoctrination, and manipulation. In the midst of a world which, due to certain economic, social, and cultural developments, is progressively disoriented and overwhelmed by rapid and drastic changes, the Church appears to many as an oasis of tradition, tranquility, and psychological and spiritual support. Unfortunately, we find that, like mosques in the Muslim world, most churches belong to organizations created by the international money power as instruments for influencing, manipulating, and controlling religion for purposes of subversion and world domination. The Riverside Church. The Riverside Church is a key element in the Rockefellers' Kremlin of New York, a complex of academic and religious institutions located in the Morningside Heights neighborhood of Manhattan, dominated by the Rockefeller-funded Columbia University. The neighborhood includes various Rockefeller-associated entities, such as Union Theological Seminary, the National Council of Churches, Teachers College, Barnard College, and International House. Riverside Church was established in 1841 as the Norfolk Street Baptist Church. It was joined by prominent New York families in the 1890s when John D. Rockefeller Jr. was elected to the Board of Trustees. One of its leaders from the 1920s to the 40s was Harry E. Fosdick, a leading leftist theologian and Rockefeller frontman, whose brother Raymond was president of the Rockefeller Foundation and the General Education Board. And I'll just pause there as well to say that we did read through the story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond Fosdick in full on the YouTube Hayes Reviews channel. That's not on the Rumble and the Odyssey, I'm afraid, but it is on the YouTube one. Quite dry, but very revealing. If you hang in there, there's a lot of little nuggets that Harry Fosdick not admits to. He just tells you straight up that what they were funding, where the money was going, how much. That's quite a good one. And so, continuing. But yeah, Harry Fosdick had a brother, Raymond Fosdick was the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, had a brother, Harry Fosdick, who was very much into Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe, involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. Continuing. The massive church building was erected at its current location on Riverside Drive with funds provided by the Rockefellers and was inaugurated in 1930. Riverside is officially an interdenominational, interracial, and international church. Devotees are daily remembered of this fact by its very architecture. The main portal contains figures of various religious leaders, including Prophet Muhammad. This is an important detail that will contribute to a better understanding of the money power's attitude towards multiracialism, multiculturalism, multi-religionism, and Islamization. True to the political aspirations of its financial backers, the church follows the social gospel tradition, which preaches a form of Christian socialism typically promoted by Anglo-American Fabian groups. Accordingly, the church lobbies for immigrants' rights, prison reform, and humane legislation. In addition, Riverside Church has been involved in projects like Occupy Faith, which supported the left-wing protest movement Occupy Wall Street. The Union Theological Seminary. Union Theological Seminary was founded in New York in 1836 and is one of America's leading theological schools. It has been funded by the Rockefellers and has been closely associated with other key New York outfits from the Riverside Church to Columbia University since the early 1900s. Riverside leader H.E. Fosdick served as professor at Union, and among its graduates have been prominent Fabian socialists like Reinhold Niebuhr, Walter Rauschenbusch, and Stephen Rockefeller, a trustee of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Union has been closely associated with the Black Liberation Movement, and its students were among the financial sponsors of the 1969 Black Economic Development Conference of Detroit, which produced the infamous Black Manifesto declaring war on white Christian churches. I've never heard of that. The Black Manifesto. Union Theological is located across Claremont Avenue from Riverside Church, and like the latter, it has been a supporter of subversive projects such as OWS. What becomes apparent is that the money power controls not only the establishment, but also opposition to the establishment. This role has been played particularly well by the Soros-associated Tides Foundation, Tides Center, and interlocking organizations, which have been identified as a nerve center of radical shadow party activity. The shadow party has been accurately described as a network of private organizations that, led by George Soros and associates, that exercises a powerful and hidden influence over the Democratic Party and through it over American politics in general. Soros Tides operations have been funded by Rockefeller-associated outfits like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Family Fund, Ford Foundation, and the Carnegie Corporation. The National Council of Churches. The National Council of Churches is another key element in the cluster of Rockefeller institutions located around Riverside Drive. The council was founded in 1908 as the Federal Council of Churches, at the instigation of Fabian socialists Walter Rauschenbusch and Harry F. Ward. Unsurprisingly, it was an organization belonging to the same social gospel Christian socialist movement as the above two outfits. From inception, the council was closely associated with well-known members of the Eastern establishment like Andrew Carnegie and CFR co-founder John Foster Dulles. Its founding conference was held at Carnegie Hall, and the council itself received funding from Andrew Carnegie. In 1958, the NCC had its permanent New York headquarters built on land donated by John D. Rockefeller Jr. across the street from Riverside Church. The 15-story Interchurch Center is the headquarters of the principal Protestant denominations in America, and as such is the Protestant equivalent of the Vatican. Already in 1921, the council established a Department of Race Relations, and from the 1960s assumed a leading role in national race policies. The National Conference for Community and Justice. The National Conference for Community and Justice, originally National Conference of Christians and Jews, was established in 1928 by CFR member Charles Evans Hughes and former president of the Rockefeller-associated National Council of Churches. In 1950, the NCCJ founded World Brotherhood at UNESCO House in Paris. Among the Brotherhood's officers were well-known architects and builders of the New World Order like CFR members John J. McCloy and Herbert H. Lehman, who was also an official of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, as well as European Federalists like Paul Henry Spaak and Konrad Adenauer. The World Council of Churches. Another organization created by the international money power as an instrument for influencing, manipulating, and controlling religion is the World Council of Churches. The WCC is an international organization established in 1948 and funded by the Rockefeller Group both directly through personal donations by members of the group and indirectly through outfits like the National Council of Churches. WCC's first Secretary General was the Dutch Willem Visser Hooft, who belonged to the social gospel movement and, like NCC leaders, preached a form of Christian socialism promoted by Anglo-American Fabian groups. In addition, Hooft maintained close links to the international money powers' secret services, operating from Geneva in the 1940s, and to the KGB. Ostensibly aiming to promote unity of faith and practice among Christian churches, in reality, the Council aims to create a new society on socialist lines and has funded anti-Christian, Marxist revolutionary, and terrorist groups like Rhodesia's, later Zimbabwe, anti-white patriotic front, whose leader, Robert Mugabe, became president. WCC is headquartered at the Ecumenical Center, 150 Route de Ferney, Geneva, in the vicinity of various UN outfits, and has declared itself committed to the principles and purposes of the UN. The two entities have been officially engaged in strong and close collaboration. The Milner-Fabian dominated Church of England was a founding member of the WCC, and many other churches around the world have been members from 1948. Other key members are various Anglican, Protestant, and from the early 1960s, Eastern Orthodox, Bulgarian, Romanian, Russian, Serbian churches. While not a member, the Catholic Church has worked closely with the Council for decades, according to the latter. I'm going to need a swig. That was a lot of reading. Shame Anarchist is here. Good evening. How are you doing? Just in time to watch me take a swig. That was a swig that time, not a swib. Celine Lyon says, keep swibbing, Nick. You can do it. And the globe will always be their last laugh. Do you mean the globe model? The globe model of Earth? Yeah. Doesn't explain everything, does it? But neither does the flat model. So who knows what's going on? Sharmanicus says, Occupy movement was so obviously controlled opposition from the outset. Yes. It's a shame, isn't it, these controlled oppositions, because they hoover up so much good intention, so much energy, passion, so much dedication, so much focus, so much will to do something meaningful and important, and it just neutralizes all that good energy. And it just makes it's kind of what, like, big sports events do, big concerts, music events, these big stadium type scenarios. Like, it's almost like a way to diffuse all this energy that might otherwise be used to get these parasite cowards off our necks. But because people can go and shout and scream at their favorite sports ball team, or they can go and get wasted and jump up and down in a dark room with lasers and music, they don't have any energy left for fighting the parasites, do they? Frank Lennon says, so much of this proto-technocratic movement was spawned between 1945 and 1950. Yeah. And that reminds me, I'll give a plug to a Rumble channel called May and the Magic Bullet. May and the Magic Bullet. It's I've been enjoying. There's 100 episodes on there, and the guy who makes the videos, he goes through the broadcasts of a woman called May Brussel, who was broadcasting, I think, in the 60s and 70s, maybe a bit earlier. And she was like an original investigative, independent researcher, and she was very suspicious about the official story of the JFK assassination and started doing her own research, and then became a radio show, talk show host for many, many years. And she did hundreds of hours of shows. And on this channel, on Rumble, May and the Magic Bullet, Tim, the host, he takes her episodes and then he researches everything she says and he puts it into a presentation and he talks you through it. I'm on episode 10 now, actually, out of 100. And he talks about how the Operation Paperclip at the end of that period that you just described, Frank, 1945 to 1950, World War II ended. The Nazis didn't lose, right? They just got exported out and given jobs and given roles and incorporated into the ruling oligarchies kind of machinery, let's say. And it's really fascinating to hear him describe this, and May describe this as well. So I think you're absolutely right. That time frame, 1945 to 50, is absolutely critical. I mean, it's all critical. There's always stuff going on. But it's pretty shocking to find out that Operation Paperclip exists, and that that these people are... Sorry, I just got totally distracted by random questions coming into the chat. I'll get to those in a minute. Anyway, the point is, May and the Magic Bullet on Rumble is a great channel. Not many people, not a lot of followers and subs on it, but there's over 100 episodes there, really well researched, kind of similar to my presentations, but they have groups on their calls. So there's multiple people giving their opinions, people who are long-time researchers, and it's really good. So I would recommend that. So we got a question over on Odyssey, which is all about, do I support a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, and am I against the genocide Israel is perpetrating in Gaza? What does that question have to do with anything that we're talking about on the channel? This is not the channel for discussing that sort of thing at the minute. But if you got a good book to recommend on that topic, please let me know, and we could read one of those later. I'm all for a permanent ceasefire everywhere. I don't think anyone should be firing at anybody else. I think everybody in the world should resign immediately from the militaries and the police forces, stop being order followers, stop being hired killers and bullies and kidnappers. That's what I think about that. Stripey's Fur asks on Rumble, do you think trans women should have workplace discrimination protections, such as being able to go to HR if a co-worker is calling them names? These three questions just all popped in at the same time, which I find very, very strange indeed. I don't have an opinion on that. Workplace discrimination protections, I don't think has anything to do with tonight's discussion. I've got a good book to recommend on that topic, though. I'll get it out for you. This one, it's called The Transgender Industrial Complex by Scott Howard. If you give that book a read, Stripey's Fur, and then come back, and maybe we'll read that on the channel, and then I might address that topic at some point in the future. And then over on YouTube, the third question that all appeared was also about trans women. Should they be allowed to play sports alongside women who are not trans? Again, what does that have to do with anything? This is a really weird, sudden bombing of the chat with questions that have nothing to do with tonight's broadcast. So again, same answer, Shast Slay. Read that book, and we'll discuss that on the channel at some point. But for now, we're discussing the Milner-Fabian conspiracy, and it hasn't been linked into the trans issue or the Israel-Gaza issue yet. But I bet if we dig deep enough, there will be some kind of overlap, and we will be able to find something going on there. Anyway, back to the book. The UN as an instrument for global oppression. As noted earlier, the UN was based on inequality among nations. Many nations which had been sovereign before World War II, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, Germany, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and the Baltic countries, found themselves divided into zones of occupation and spheres of influence, over which they had no control, becoming virtual colonies of communist Russia and its Western allies with UN approval. Even outside Europe, there were countries like India which, in spite of becoming independent in 1947, found itself under the repressive Fabian socialist regime of Jawaharlal Nehru, a staunch supporter of the UN. Maoist China, too, despite its being a murderous communist dictatorship, became a leading UN member, along with its fellow communist dictatorship, Stalinist Russia. The UN has actively supported dictatorships and corrupt regimes in Africa, Asia, and elsewhere. Some notorious early examples exposing the true nature of the UN are its interventions on the side of Soviet-backed communists in Korea in the 1950s and in the Belgian Congo in the 1960s. Yes, Hasdak. 77 bots, trolls. They're just all locked on. They got me in the crosshairs. All right, continuing. The United Nations Foundation. The United Nations Foundation is one of the organizations through which the Anglo-American establishment funds and controls the UN. The UNF was established in 1998 by Robert Edward Turner and is run by a small and cohesive board of directors, which includes UNF founder and chairman Ted Turner himself, Emma Rothschild, and Kofi Annan. Turner is the founder and chairman of Turner Enterprises and CNN, and former vice chairman as well as major shareholder of Rockefeller-dominated global media group Time Warner. He is also a major financial supporter of the UNF. Emma Rothschild is Harvard University Professor of History, Cambridge University Honorary Professor of History and Economics, former member of the British government's Council for Science and Technology, former chairman of the Kennedy Memorial Trust and the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, and former member of the Carnegie MacArthur Committee on International Security. It's quite a CV. She is the daughter of Fabian socialist and Labour peer Lord Victor Rothschild of Shell, sister of Amschel Rothschild of NM Rothschild, half-sister of Lord Jacob Rothschild of Rothschild Investment Trust Capital Partners, and a relative through her maternal grandmother of leading Fabian ideologue Beatrice Webb. In addition, Emma is married to left-wing Harvard economist Amartya Sen, an alumnus of the Delhi School of Economics, a clone of the Fabian LSE, a trustee of Economists for Peace and Security, and a member of Oxford Martin School's Advisory Council. Kofi Annan was UN Secretary General from 1997 to 2006 and is one of the money power's key global agents, being a long-time lieutenant of David Rockefeller and member of J.P. Morgan International Council. Rockefeller's relationship to his agents is indicated by the back cover of his memoirs, listing advance praise for the book from Rockefeller apostles Henry Kissinger, Nelson Mandela, Kofi Annan, and Prof. John Kenneth Galbraith. So hang on, did he just say that's on the back of memoirs? Yeah, I think it is. It is. So on the back of memoirs, Kissinger, Mandela, Kofi Annan, John Kenneth Galbraith. There it is. True story, not fake news. Fact checked. Fact checked, correct. Accordingly, the UNF, which works closely with the Rockefeller Foundation and other organizations of associated interests funding the UN, concerns itself with humanitarian, socio-economic, and environmental issues, and has funded UN programs like the Better World Campaign, which aims to tie the United States closer to the UN. The Millennium Project. The Millennium Project is a typical Fabian socialist initiative launched by UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan in 2000. Ostensibly aiming to cut poverty, it has been described as the largest global wealth redistribution program ever conceived. In the wake of the 11/9 attacks, the Millennium Project identified poverty as the, quote, cause of terrorism. Yeah, not the British establishment who were training them and funding them. And right, according to Royal Institute for International Affairs researcher Mark Curtis in his book Over the Shoulder, Secret Affairs, right there. Not that. That's not the number one cause. It's poverty. Therefore, we need more wealth distribution, i.e. socialism. In effect, hijacking the war on terrorism and making it into a war on poverty for its own subversive purposes. From inception, the project was headed by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, former director of the Harvard Institute for International Development and close collaborator of George Soros. The Global Forum on Migration and Development. The Global Forum on Migration and Development was established in 2006 by Peter Sutherland, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General for Migration, at the Secretary-General's request. Sutherland is a leading member of the Anglo-American establishment, having served as Vice Chairman of the European Round Table of Industrialists, Chairman of Goldman Sachs International, Chairman of the Trilateral Commission Europe, and, until 2015, Chairman of LSE. The forum meets in Geneva about once a month to make proposals for the annual meetings, which take place in member states. It is backed in its work by the European Commission and is funded by the MacArthur Foundation. The latter is run by CFR member Barry Lowen Cron, Marjorie M. Scardino, CEO of Pearson and former CEO of The Economist Group, and Jamie Gorlick, Director of the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace and CFR member. The MacArthur Foundation is also notorious for financing left-wing organizations and significantly pro-immigration groups. Yeah. Just goes on and on and on and on the list, doesn't it? Heidi said, wow, he really names all of them. Excellent resource here. Yes, I totally agree. Heidi says, I sent a good IMF critique in the Telegram. Thank you for that. On YouTube, LJ, that's a first, Nick. Hasdak says, yeah, you're right. That's the first time I've been targeted by people asking questions that have nothing to do on all three broadcasts at the same time as well. That's crazy. But, you know, we got about 7 pages left to do, so can't stop now, can we? Seeing as it's the shortest day of the year, we'll make this the longest stream of the year. You know, it's nice symmetry, isn't it? Nice symmetry to do that. We'll make on the shortest day of the year, we'll do the longest stream of the year, and get to the end of this chapter. So, continuing, we got the UN and the politics of race as an instrument for world domination. From the very start, the UN has shown a strange, yet, given its origins, understandable obsession with race. It first began by suggesting that the word race should not even be mentioned. A statement issued by UNESCO on the 18th of July 1950 declared, quote, "It would be better when speaking of human races to drop the term race altogether and speak of ethnic groups." It later attempted to ban even the use of ethnic groups as incompatible with the UN's new liberal world order. Quote, "Any distinction or preference based on race, color, ethnic, or national origin is incompatible with the requirements of an international order, which is just." And that is from the Declaration on Race and Racial Prejudice from portal.unesco.org. Incompatible with the requirements of an international order. Interestingly, UNESCO also admitted the existence of entities controlling the mass media. Quote, "The mass media and those who control or serve them are urged to contribute to the eradication of racism, racial discrimination, and racial prejudice." That is an interesting admission. That's also from the same place. The question is, who controls whom? Clearly, the UN makes the rules based on its own Charter and Declaration of Human Rights. Quote, "Confirming UNESCO's attachment to the principles proclaimed in the United Nations Charter." The UN also demands that its rules be made law in all countries. Quote, States should adopt such legislation as is appropriate to this end, and see that it is given effect and applied by all their services. With due regard to the principles embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. End quote. The ultimate goal of all this, of course, is the establishment of a new world order, quote, "confirming its determination to promote the implementation of the Declaration on the Establishment of a New International Economic Order. And that is from the Declaration on Race and Racial Prejudice preamble at portal.unesco.org. There we have it. Black on white. This is what it is all about. This is why the UN has been created by socialists in collaboration with international financiers to establish a new economic world order that serves the interests of monopolistic international capitalism. Needless to say, this new economic world order has been the central plank in Marxism, Fabian socialism, and related left-wing ideologies, including Rockefeller republicanism. Moreover, there is no evidence whatsoever that the UN has eradicated racism. On the contrary, racism, racial discrimination, and racial prejudice are even more widespread than ever. The only difference being that it is now directed at the white race, as can be seen from the way white people are treated in Africa, America, Asia, Europe, and elsewhere. As pointed out by the watchdog group Ioan the UN, quote, the UN's idea of combating racism and xenophobia is to encourage more of it. And that's from the BBC News. Yeah, because if you think about it, like, you say you want to get rid of racism, and then you create conditions in which massive numbers of culturally diverse people are forced to live together without any training or coaching or guidance on how to integrate and how to like, there is no integration really. Like, you've got your culture, I've got my culture, and that's it. We're different. And most people like to live among people who look like them and have the same culture as them. And that's good, because if we all do that, then we can visit the different places with the different groups of people that have the different cultures, and that makes travel interesting and rewarding and fun. When you just smoosh a lot of people together, then you're massively increasing the chance for racism to occur, because you're going to create all this friction. Lots of people doing things differently, all in one place, and so of course this policy of jamming people together in cities and having these porous borders around countries where people can come and go, is, of course, that's going to increase racism. When you think about it, they say they want it. It's like that classic thing of looking at the outcome and realizing that it's all by design and done on purpose, and the system is working perfectly, right? So the system is working perfectly; it's not broken. Yeah, Frank, page 224. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, that's it. This chapter's this is a real I don't know. It's an absolute bomb, this chapter. We've got about 4.5 pages left or something. All right. UN race politics as an instrument for genocide. At the World Conference at Durban 2001, the UN stated, quote, any doctrine of racial superiority is scientifically false, morally condemnable, socially unjust and dangerous, and must be rejected along with theories which attempt to determine the existence of separate human races. That's from the Durban Declaration. While doctrines of racial superiority may or may not be, quote, scientifically false, the Declaration provides no evidence in support of its claim, it is a patent fact that human races do exist. The UN denies this. Under the pretext of combating racism, it denies the existence of different human races and, by implication, their right to life. No wonder that white communities trying to assert their right to life against state-imposed mass immigration from non-white areas are invariably branded racist and xenophobic. Well, look, if races don't exist, how can racism exist? That's what I want to know. The shocking truth behind the UN's anti-racism policies is that the white populations of Africa are already close to extinction. having been reduced to 0.65% of Africa's total population. This includes South Africa, which has traditionally had the largest white population. This trend is being repeated on other continents, including Europe, where population growth is very low and mostly driven by immigration from non-white areas like Africa and Asia. Once making up 25% of the world population in 1900, Europeans have now been reduced to 11%, and on current trends their numbers are expected to fall to 7% by 2050. That was reported in The Observer. Europe is the only region in the world to see its indigenous population decline by the end of the century. That's from Guardian data blog. Similar trends can be observed in other white majority areas like the USA. This clearly makes white people the only race on the planet with a declining population and exposes the UN's anti-racism policies as an anti-white scam. And this, I think, is the nature of the UN scam and where the chapter gets its title from. The UN and immigration. Immigration has been one of the principal tools employed by the international money power to achieve its financial, political, and socio-demographic goals. Large-scale immigration has provided economies dominated by the money power with cheap labor, maximizing its profits and those of its collaborators in business and industry. Immigration has also benefited the money power politically, serving as a growing pool of support for left-wing regimes, the money power's traditional allies, while enabling it and its political allies to use support for immigrant causes as a propaganda tool for claiming undeserved respectability and moral superiority over their political opponents. In social and demographic terms, mass immigration has been an instrument for the systematic replacement of large sections of European, North American, and other Western societies with non-European populations. The UN has been a chief architect of this process, which it has encouraged and facilitated through its various agencies and associated organizations like the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the International Labour Organization, and in particular, the International Organization for Migration. The UN Global Forum on Migration and Development works closely with the above organizations, in particular with the IMO, which is dedicated to promoting humane and orderly migration for the benefit of all, and operates in collaboration with established agencies of the money power, such as the LSE and Brookings Institution. The Global Forum, which consists of former LSE chairman Peter Sutherland and 2 collaborators, has spoken against immigration restriction and has called for the EU to do its best to undermine national homogeneity and sense of difference from others. In combination with calls by the Global Forum and other UN outfits for European nations to become more open to immigration from outside Europe, this is clear evidence of the UN's intention to use immigration as a tool for the deconstruction of Western society and its replacement with non-Western populations. I'm going to have a swig. This is pretty harrowing stuff, to be honest. It's pretty horrific. It's hard to make light of it as well when it's happening. It's happening. Okay. The UN and multiculturalism. Another strange obsession of the UN's has been cultural diversity. The UN's insistence that there must be cultural diversity in the world sounds reasonable enough. In fact, cultural diversity already exists in the world. The problem is that the UN also insists on cultural diversity within individual societies. In official UN reports, the media are urged to enhance the plurality of perspectives, while it is claimed that cultural diversity is, quote, the very definition of quality media. And that's a UNESCO report. In other words, irrespective of other essential factors like the objective reporting of facts or lack of it, the media automatically become quality media just by being culturally diverse. By that logic, all the media which have been in existence prior to the rise of mandatory cultural pluralism are pure rubbish and ought to be discarded or even declared illegal and be suppressed by the police forces of uncontrolled puppet government. Well, that's UN-controlled puppet governments. Incredibly, the UN also insists that all citizens of a country have an intimate understanding of other cultures, urging an increased awareness of the importance of understanding other cultures from within. That's from a UNESCO report. To enforce its diversitist policies, the UN, through its cultural agency UNESCO, has been campaigning for the creation of a World Observatory on Cultural Diversity and a national mechanism for monitoring public policies as they relate to cultural diversity. It goes almost without saying that state-enforced cultural diversity amounts to multiculturalism. The UN ideology of cultural diversity is the true origin and driving force behind multiculturalism. The reason behind these policies emerges from the same UN publications. On its official website, UNESCO describes cultural diversity as a driving force for economic growth. This, once again, exposes the UN as an instrument for advancing the interests of monopolistic international financiers and other liberal elitist groups seeking to control the world's economy and increase their profits from economic growth. The UN's multiculturalist agenda is confirmed by the statements of Peter Sutherland of the UN Forum on Migration to the effect that, quote, the world towards which we are increasingly moving is multicultural. The truth of the matter, of course, is that we are not moving towards a multicultural world of our own free will, but are being pushed in that direction by the international money power and its representatives like Mr. Sutherland himself. I think this is our last section now. Yep. All right, so we got 2 pages left, and then we'll have a look at the references in the notes. And then we'll call it a night. Thanks for hanging in there. This is the last section, the UN and Islamization. The UN's pro-Islamic policies are closely linked with 3 key elements in the UN system. 1, the socialist aim to create a world government. 2, the socialist aim to destroy traditional Western civilization. And 3, the oil interests of the UN's financial backers, many of whom, for example, the Rockefeller Group, are socialists. Socialism sees traditional Western culture, such as Christian values, as undesirable. In its effort to transform Western culture and make it comply with the requirements of progressive fantasies, socialism allies itself with non-Western cultures, elements of which it uses as instruments for advancing its own agenda. Various forms of reformed Islam had been promoted by Milner-Fabian interests from the early 1900s. This pattern was naturally carried on by the UN, which was created by the same interests. In the 1980s, the UN's cultural agency UNESCO began to promote Islamic culture as part of its cultural diversity program. One such initiative was the production of Sufi music records by Ovidis. Incidentally, this exposes the hypocrisy of pro-Islamization interests who are using Sufi cultural elements as a decoy for making Islam more appealing to non-Muslims, while at the same time suppressing all forms of non-Islamic culture in Muslim countries. At a UN meeting in 1998, Iranian President Mohammad Khatami proposed to make the year 2001 the, quote, United Nations Year of Dialogue Among Civilizations. The resolution GA/RES/53/22 was backed by 12 Islamic states and left-wing US Secretary of State and CFR member Madeleine Albright. In November 2001, following the 11/9 terror attacks on New York and Washington, UNESCO's governing body, the General Conference, headed by Director General Koichiro Matsuura, adopted the Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity, in which the member states reaffirmed their conviction that intercultural dialogue is the best guarantee of peace, thus categorically rejecting the idea that conflicts between cultures and civilizations are inevitable. Of course, when one culture like that of the West voluntarily adopts another culture like Islam, the conflict between cultures and civilizations is entirely evitable. Is that a word? Evitable? Inevitable? Evitable? When the UN speaks of intercultural dialogue, it invariably means dialogue with Islam. And dialogue with Islam means the promotion of Islamic culture and religion and their adoption in the West. Accordingly, in 2004, the UN, in collaboration with European and Arab foreign ministers, set up the Anna Lindh Foundation for Dialogue Between Cultures, with the seat in Alexandria, Egypt. In 2005, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, in collaboration with Spain's socialist leader Zapatero and Turkey's Islamist Prime Minister Recep Erdogan, created a UN high-level group to set up an organization called Alliance of Civilizations. The AOC ostensibly aims to build bridges between the West and the Islamic world. Its true purpose is to promote Islam in the West and legitimize, normalize, and accelerate the Islamization process. In 2007, UNESCO celebrated the 800th anniversary of Muslim poet Jalal-ud-Din Rumi by declaring that year, quote, the International Year of Rumi, and launching a series of pro-Islamic propaganda programs, including a seminar on 6 September opened by UNESCO Director General Matsuura, discussing the, quote, universality of Rumi in the 21st century. In July 2008, the Anna Lindh Foundation and the Alliance of Civilizations, in collaboration with the Arab League, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, and 43 European and Arab heads of state and government, launched the Barcelona Process, Union for the Mediterranean, with the aim of incorporating Islamic North Africa, Turkey, and the Middle East into the European Union. In November 2008, the European section of the Rockefeller-dominated Trilateral Commission, under Chairman Peter Sutherland of the UN Global Forum on Migration, met in Paris, where it praised the UN-EU program for uniting Europe with Islamic states as, quote, a model for the world. At the same time, several UN high officials, including UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Luis Arbour, UN High Representative for the Alliance of Civilizations Jorge Sampaio, and President of the UN Human Rights Council Doru Romulus Costea, attacked all criticism of Islam and suppressed debate on Islamic teachings and practices. And that is the end of the chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the chapter. My throat really needs some beer. And beer it's going to get. That was far and away the spiciest, fieriest chapter of the book so far, I think. He really kind of peaked, climaxed. He really hit his pace, hit his stride in that chapter. And it was 30 pages, so it wasn't a long one, but it seemed, I mean, it was packed. I was stopping it was pretty long, I suppose. It was actually 39 pages, so it's quite a long chapter, but that chapter is really where it took off and everything came together. What an excellent writer. Everything fed into that chapter, knowing about the CFR, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the origins of those two organizations linked with the Fabian Socialists and the Cecil Rhodes / Lord Milner Roundtable secret society groups. So he's done a really masterful job of linking it all together in a continuous chain right back to Lord Milner, Really masterful job. Clearly well read. His sources very rock solid as far as I can tell. And I have a lot of the books that he relies on back here. We've read Fearful Master and Fabian Freeway on the channel. Both excellent books. And so he's just piggybacking off really good work and just adding the cherry on top. That's what this book is. And it's amazing. It only goes up to 2012. And I think, Frank, you said, yeah, good Lord. So Frank Lennon said, that book was written in 2012, 12 years ago, and we bear witness to the unfolding of it all. Yeah. Everything he's describing here has accelerated massively in the last 12 years. The multiculturalism, smooshing together of different religions, of different colored people with different cuisines and languages and ways of living and values, smushing them all together, herding them into cities for what? I do wonder sometimes. We almost had it earlier this year with the riots that happened. I thought that might be the spark that ignited some sort of racially based conflict on our streets or in our communities and countries. I feel like their stage is being set for something like that, or that might just be one of the contingencies and the plans that are waiting in the wings, because we do know that they war game and plan these things out, and they have every eventuality sort of scripted and identified ahead of time. So who knows? But this really shows you that the whole thing is being puppeteered masterfully, and it goes back quite a ways, at least 100 years, according to this book, probably much further, because obviously Cecil Rhodes and Lord Milner didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't just magically appear on the scene in a puff of smoke. They have a whole history and legacy to them as well. But in terms of verifiable history that we can read about and who has paper trail, I think going back further than that, it starts to get harder, perhaps. I'm not sure. But yeah, incredible work, incredible writing. And that chapter, CFR, Rockefellers, all the different arms and tentacles of the UN, the ecumenical movement. Is that right, Heidi? Is it ecumenical movement or ecumenist movement? I'm not quite sure how you say it. Ecumenism. But this idea of smooshing all the religions together as well and just finding out what's common. It's kind of like the idea of theosophy. And theosophy was Annie Besant's thing. She was a Fabian socialist. So the theosophy, Annie Besant's theosophy, is very much linked to this Rockefeller movement of bringing all the churches together and all the main religions together, and that feeds into the UN's little meditation prayer room, and they're trying to homogenize and squeeze everybody into a one world culture, a one world system. And that economic system is run by the financiers, and the financiers fund both the quote unquote capitalists, monopoly capitalists, and the communists and the socialists, funded by both sides funded by the same people. So it's always about follow the money. Who's making the money? Who's printing it? What kind of money do we have? And it's the Keynesian economic system that's being rolled out everywhere, not the Austrian economic system, which I don't know a lot about, but I know that it's not taught in schools and universities. It's all Keynesian economics, and all the people going to the London School of Economics will be learning Keynesian economics and taking that back to their homes and their countries and their roles, and ensuring that they do what they can to make sure their home countries are ready to be plugged into this system as well. And that's what I'm seeing here. The picture unfolding is that it's all about this creation and control of an economic system and plugging everybody everywhere into it. Right. So we've all got that to look forward to. Yippee. Happy New Year, everybody. So Heidi over on Rumble is saying, it's not anti-white, it's anti-Christian. Race doesn't exist. Ask any multi-generational mixed family. The false idea of race allows racism. Unpopular, but true. Well, you can't have race without racism, can you? And you can't have racism without race, is what I'm saying. certain cultures being targeted for ridicule and bits of other cultures being promoted. Yeah, the thing about white is, what does it mean? There are no white people really, are there? There's pink, there's various shades of brown, and dark-skinned, and then everything in between. You can't really draw a line. So this group's white and this group's not white. And there's certainly so it's all nonsense, but it's very divisive. Over on YouTube, we've got Hasdak turning in for the night. Good night. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you. I'll see you in the new year. This is the last stream of the year. I'm going to be back, however. Oh, no, hang on. It's not the last stream of the year because I'm going to come back on New Year's Eve and do one on the 31st on New Year's Eve. So we got one more stream this year. But it's definitely going to be the longest one of the year. I'm not doing any more this long. So, Armory1 says, where can we support you? allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Thank you for asking. Should be pinned at the top of the chat. If not, it's a very straightforward URL. allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. And I got like PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee and crypto wallets and other stuff all on there. And you can join the mailing list by shooting me an email, autonomous username @gmail.com. ESP says Jekyll Island was a place where they used to meet up a lot. Yeah, Jekyll Island, that's a key part. Somebody was recommending that might be a good book to read next, G. Edward Griffin's Creature from Jekyll Island, which is definitely a possibility. Okay, we got one thing left to do, and that is have a look at the sources and the references before we call it a night. Get some ideas for books you might want to keep an eye out for or buy, add to your collection. Let's see. Let's go through some of these. So we got Ban Ki-moon, Peter Thomas Bauer, Descent on Development, London 1976, and From Subsistence to Exchange and Other Essays. I think that those two would be good. I remember the references to Peter Bauer being pretty powerful. Then we got the classic Margaret Cole, Story of Favorite Socialism. We've got the Rockefellers, the Peter and the Horowitz and Collier book. We got another Mark Curtis book. So it's not the Secret Affairs one. It's a different one called The Great Deception, Anglo-American Power and World Order. So that's a different one I haven't got, but I would like to get hold of. Let's have a look. The Social Thought of the World Council of Churches. So that's getting into your ecumenical movement. Then Griffin's book, Fearful Master. U.S. Relations with the World Bank, Catherine Gwynne. That sounds like it would be a good one too. John Eugene Harley, International Understanding, Agencies Educating for a New World. And then there's this Horowitz and Poe book, The Shadow Party, How Hillary Clinton and 60s Radicals Seized Control of the Democratic Party. I think that would be a good one as well. And on page 2, we've got this is pretty well referenced. These, if you read all these, that's some really deep research for this chapter. So pretty impressive. There's Martin Rose, Fabian Freeway, of course. Nelson Rockefeller, Joe Alex Morris book, and Christopher O'Sullivan, Sumner Wells, Post-War Planning and the Quest for a New World Order. Haven't heard of that one before. The Debt Trap, the International Monetary Fund and the Third World, Cheryl Payer. What else we got that stands out here? Dan Smoot's book, The Invisible Government, 1962. That sounds like a must-read to me. Stealth Jihad by Robert Spencer. Yeah, I think that's about it. Right, so there you go. There's your research and your resources for further reading. And next chapter is going to be the EU scam. And if it's anything like the one we read tonight, it's going to be a rip-roaring rampage. But that's so the next video is going to be the next live stream is going to be 31st. We're going to do New Year's Eve. Maybe I'll have a beer on that one as well. We shall see. I'm going to have a week off now, Christmas and all that. Got to do some family stuff. So I hope you all have good festive times, eating, drinking, relaxing, being merry. Don't indulge too much. Try and get that sunlight if you can. Stay healthy as best you can. Stay away from arguing and fighting with your family and your loved ones, because They're all you got, and you're going to miss them when they're gone. So if they don't want to know about the Milner-Fabian conspiracy, you got to forgive them. Try and find a topic that you both do want to know about and talk about, you know. But if they show an interest in these kind of things and they're starting to wake up and notice, maybe you'll send them to Hayes Reviews and let them know that they could do some more learning if they have the appetite and the attention span. It's the attention span that I think is really going to get in the way for most people, unfortunately. Right, so I think we'll call it a night. allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews, where you can find my email address, you can find ways to donate, you can find my social media presence, you can listen to my album on SoundCloud, Brave New World Order, and you can also join my online community, Deviced, which is on the school platform. Deviced meetings are going to be kicking off in the first week of January, so it's not live just yet. We've just got people coming in, joining up. 1st of January is going to be the kickoff for those meetings, and we're going to be reading 4 arguments for the elimination of television. So bad news, Hasdak. I saw earlier that you're going to go and watch some Auf Wiedersehen Pet. You might have to enjoy your television while you can before we persuade you to throw it out of the window and smash it up. So Merry Christmas to you all. I hope you have a good one. I'm very grateful for each and everybody who tunes in live or after the fact. It's amazing. And just I hope that this workout for your attention span pays dividends down the road and in the future, right? So let's leave it there. Thank you all for hanging in there. It's been a wonderful show. I'm getting a bit tired now, but take care of yourselves and each other, and have a wonderful, enjoyable, festive season, right? It's dark, but it's going to be getting lighter. Remember that. The days are getting longer from now on. Shortest day of the year, longest stream of the year. Tick those boxes, and now we are on the climb. Things are only going to get better from here on out, until the summer solstice, and then they start getting worse again. But you know how it works by now. So take care of yourselves and each other. I will see you on the 31st, December the 31st, for the next chapter. And that's all I got to say for now. So God bless.